124 people have been executed in Florida. John Arthur Spenkeling, May 25, 1979, electrocution. On February 4, 1973, Spenkeling, who was just 24 years old and already a twice convicted felon and a fugitive from a California prison camp, encountered a hitchhiker named Joseph J. Simankiewicz while driving through the Midwest and decided to give him a ride. Both men shared similar traits. They had criminal pasts and were known to be heavy drinkers. Eventually, they ended up in Tallahassee, Florida, where they checked into a hotel room together. At one point, Spenkeling stepped out to wash his car, but when he returned, he fatally shot Simankiewicz as he slept. One bullet struck the victim in the head just behind his left ear, and the second entered through his back. After the shooting, Spenkeling fabricated a story to explain the situation to the hotel owner, paid for an additional night's stay, and soon departed with another hitchhiker named Frank Broom. Later, Spenkeling asserted that he acted in self-defense. He claimed that Simankiewicz had previously forced him to have relations and had made him play a game of Russian roulette. According to Spenkeling's account, the firearm discharged accidentally during a physical altercation between the two men. Less than a week after, both Spenkeling and Broom were apprehended in Buena Park, California, on suspicion of armed robbery. When investigators searched an apartment rented by Broom and several others, they discovered the weapon used in the murder. The pair was extradited to Florida, where they were tried for first-degree murder. The jury convicted Spenkeling, while Broom was acquitted of all charges.
Everybody has hope back there. I don't think if there'd just be a very few that don't. But I don't think there's anybody on death row now that does want to die.
Spenkeling ultimately became the first person executed in Florida and the second individual nationwide following the 1976 reinstatement of the death penalty in the U.S. Unlike Gary Gilmore, who had been the first to be executed and had accepted his sentence without contest, Spenkeling fought against his execution until the very end.
Caught me off guard. I didn't expect it. I didn't think mine would be the first one signed. After it was signed, though, well, it was just something we had to accept. I had a pretty heavy faith in my attorneys, though. I think I was, well, there was some of the attorneys that represent me now, like Anthony Amsterdam. Now, he's representing death row cases all across the country. And there's different chloration organizations that are helping against the death penalty. And if it wasn't for them people there, they might have went ahead and got away with it, the state of Florida.
His execution ultimately took place on May 25, 1979, in Florida State Prison's infamous electric chair nicknamed Old Sparky. On the morning of his death, a Jacksonville radio personality named Doug Tracht, widely known by his on-air moniker, the Grease Man, played the sound effect of bacon sizzling on a hot pan during his broadcast. He then dedicated the recording to Spenkeling, turning the grim occasion into a dark, mocking gesture that drew attention for its morbid humor. Spenkeling's last words were, "Capital punishment. Them without the capital get the punishment." For his last request before execution, John Spenkeling asked for a single flask of Jack Daniel's whiskey instead of a meal. He reportedly shared the flask with the prison superintendent. The request led the state of Florida to revise its last meal policy to specifically exclude alcohol and also limit the meal cost to $40. Robert Austin Sullivan, November 30, 1983, electrocution. Sullivan, who was 36 years old at the time of his execution, had been sentenced to death for the brutal killing of Donald Schmidt on April 8, 1973. Schmidt was the assistant manager of a Howard Johnson's restaurant in Homestead, Florida, where Sullivan had once been employed. Being the adopted son of a Harvard-educated doctor, Sullivan's background contrasted sharply with the crime that ultimately sealed his fate. Together with his boyfriend, Reed McLaughlin, he abducted Schmidt, binding the man's wrists behind his back with tape before driving him to a remote, swampy area. There, the two men shot him twice in the head with a double-barreled shotgun. When police later apprehended Sullivan, they discovered incriminating evidence in his possession, including the shotgun, a handgun, a roll of white adhesive tape, and Schmidt's credit cards. During questioning, Sullivan confessed to the murder and implicated McLaughlin as his accomplice. McLaughlin also admitted his involvement but reached a plea deal with prosecutors in exchange for testifying against Sullivan. As a result, McLaughlin was sentenced to life in prison instead of facing the death penalty. Sullivan's trial concluded in November 1973. Although the jury recommended a life sentence, the presiding judge overrode their decision and imposed the death penalty. He would later become one of the longest-serving inmates on death row in the U.S., remaining there for more than 10 years before his execution.
I'm 32 years old. I was convicted of first-degree murder when I was 25 in 1973 in Miami. The charges that I am accused of is a robbery murder of a Howard Johnson's restaurant assistant manager for about 8 years. About half of that was attending the University of Miami for 4 years, majoring in business management. Prior to that, I lived in Belmont, Massachusetts, and Nashua, New Hampshire.
How long have you been in death row?
I am, at this time, the oldest person on death row by the amount of time that is served. I arrived on death row November 14th, 1973, which is well over 2,000 days.
Where are you in the appellate process right now? What has happened on your particular case?
In June, Governor Graham signed my death warrant, and my lawyers were able to secure a stay for me from Judge Jose Gonzalez in the Federal District Court in Fort Lauderdale. Next week on March the 6th, we will have an evidentiary hearing before the U.S. magistrate assigned to the case. We are confined to the cells 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except for showers, 5 minutes worth every other night, and 6 hours of exercise periods. All the remaining hours must be spent inside the cell, one-man cells. Different people have different things to try to occupy their minds, some constructively, some not so constructively. As for myself, I write an awful lot. I work on my case. I correspond with over 50 people. And I like to read. I try very hard to have enough to occupy my time reading and writing for about 8 to 10 hours every day.
Is there television?
Yes, each man is provided by the state a in-cell black and white TV set, which is a good pacifier. It's I probably watch less TV than any other man on death row because I have other type activities that I enjoy doing. But it's always there if I want it or need it, and it's a good pacifier.
Do you fear for your life ever?
I really don't ever dwell on it that much.
What was it like on death row when John Spinklink was executed? Can you describe it for us?
My particular vantage point to the execution room or execution chamber is only about 125 feet on the hypotenuse of a right triangle. And so I could see just about everything but what was going on inside the room. And it bothered me very, very much at that time, and it has bothered me ever since. It was, I knew John ever since he arrived after me in 1974, and to see someone that I knew and liked be legally murdered by the state really, really bothered me. And and then my own death watch was I was able to experience the anxieties and the tensions of what led up to and preceded his execution up to a point. I didn't have to go through the final hours per se, but it's a mind-bending experience.
What should society do?
Okay, well, one of the main arguments of the death penalty is that it will potentially deter other people from committing crimes.
Do you think it will?
Definitely not. Looking at it in the abstract sense, most people who do commit crimes do it under one of two sets of circumstances. One is a passion type emotional thing, and that is a spur of the moment thing, and no penalty whatsoever will enter into their minds. The other area are people who don't think they're going to be caught, and I have never known anyone who doesn't think he's going to be caught. The end result will not deter them from anything. Therefore, the whole principle of capital punishment, as postulated by the politicians, is a total sham.
A farce.
That's a farce, unbelievable farce. It's a cheap way for the politicians to appease their constituency that they're doing something about crime. But the way to get crime is not after the fact, but before the fact. And that's the only way that you will get to deter crime, not by some abstract punishment that people don't think they're ever going to get. Looking at John Spinklink's execution, what purpose did it serve? Man was legally murdered. The murder rates in Florida immediately after that and the quarter after that rose. I would think with all the media exposure that execution drew, and I don't think it'll ever be that great again, if there was going to be a effect that the politicians are trying to tell people that will occur, it would have occurred immediately after that execution. But the murder rates rose by an appreciable percent. I believe in Miami they went up something like 13%, which to me is a large percent. If I were ever executed, I would not object to my execution being televised. I'm sure there'd be a lot of people who would, want to see something like that happen. They're very bloodthirsty. I think the people in the middle of the spectrum, some people like death penalty, some people do not, but I think the people in the middle would be affected by something like that, where they would not want it as part of the criminal justice system. Back in England, they used to have executions out in the public, and an interesting irony that I have always enjoyed about the death penalty is that when people were hung for committing various crimes such as pickpocketing, there would be pickpockets in the crowd, working the crowd at an execution for other pickpockets. Seemingly because of that, the deterrence effect is non-existent. If people were to look at the death penalty in the sense that if it was their brother or their son, their father, their husband or wife, there are women on death row in the United States, including one in Florida, that and look at it in that sense of what the families must go through of the people on death row, that would be a different perspective. That it's I have sympathy for the families of the victims of crime, but there are also families of the people on death row that I hear very little about. And it's a long, tortuous ordeal for the families of people on death row to keep coming here and going through the ups and downs of the criminal justice system through the years on death row. And I would hope that they might consider it in that vein.
His last meal was steak, French fries, milk, and fresh strawberries. His last words were an appeal to his fellow death row inmates to continue the fight against capital punishment and the message of a lack of malice. He said, "In spite of what is about to happen, do not quit. I hold no malice to none. May God bless us all." He also thanked Pope John Paul II for his personal intervention, asking that his life was spared. Anthony Antone, January 26, 1984, electrocution. Antone, age 66 at the time of his death, was executed for orchestrating the contract killing of Tampa private investigators Richard Cloud, which took place on October 23, 1975. The murder had been ordered by organized crime figure Victor Acosta, who sought Cloud's death. Antone's role in the scheme was to locate and hire two hitmen to carry out the assassination. In the aftermath of the crime, both Acosta and the gunman who actually pulled the trigger took their own lives, leaving only the second hired killer, Ellis Haskew, to face prosecution. Haskew ultimately agreed to cooperate with authorities and testified against Antone, turning state's evidence in exchange for leniency. During his trial, Antone took the stand in his own defense, firmly denying any involvement in the murder-for-hire plot. Despite his testimony and claims of innocence, he was convicted and sentenced to death for his role in arranging the killing. His last words were an adaptation of the words of Jesus on the cross, and he ordered a final meal which he mostly did not eat. He said, "All I can say is, forgive them, Father, for their ignorance. They know not what they do." That's it. He had previously stated that he had no fear of death and wanted to get it over with and go on to the next life, but was concerned the electric jolt would abruptly expel his astral counterpart from his body. For his final meal, Antone requested steak, eggs, coffee, and grapefruit juice. He was given the meal at 4 a.m., a few hours before his execution, but only consumed the coffee and grapefruit juice, leaving the solid food untouched. Arthur Frederick Good III, April 5, 1984, electrocution. Arthur Good suffered from borderline retardation. He rapidly gained notoriety in his own area when he started making sexual advances to younger boys when he was a teenager. He was arrested 3 times for indecent assaults on youngsters, but each time his parents posted bail and he was released. Good's abuse of a 9-year-old kid led to his arrest in March 1975 on 5 charges of SA. Yet again, his parents managed to raise $25,000 to get him out of jail. He molested an 11-year-old while out on bail and was granted 5 years of probation in exchange for voluntary psychiatric treatment at Spring Grove State Hospital. The crucial word was voluntary, and when Good left the hospital 15 weeks later and boarded a bus for his parents' new residence in St. James City, Florida, nobody could stop him. No one tried to pursue Good and bring him back, even after warnings and the bench warrant for his arrest were issued. Good lured 9-year-old Jason Verdeau from a Fort Myers school bus stop on March 5, 1976, by asking the youngster to help him find something in the nearby woods. Good subsequently admitted, "I told him he was going to die and described how I would kill him. I love you," he responded when I asked if he had any final words before I strangled him. Good was questioned twice as a suspect in the crime when police quickly found the victim, which was naked save for stockings. Anxious, he took a bus back to Spring Grove and stopped at the state hospital. He stayed there for 5 minutes before running out, believing a receptionist was contacting the police. Later that day, Good picked up 10-year-old Billy Arthey and convinced him to travel with him to Washington, D.C., where they stayed in motels and explored the city for 10 days. On March 20, Arthey was still unharmed with Good when they encountered 11-year-old Kenny Dawson. Good persuaded the youngster to accompany them on a bus ride to Tyson's Corner, Virginia. Billy Arthey watched in horror as Good made Dawson undress while they were hiking in the woods close to town and then strangled him with a belt. A few days later, a housewife in Falls Church called the police after recognizing Billy Arthey from pictures in the newspaper. As he was placed in handcuffs, Good grumbled, "You can't do nothing to me. I'm sick." On the contrary, a Maryland jury found him guilty of murder and sane. The court sentenced him to life in prison. After his trial, Good was transported to Florida, where he was found guilty of a second murder charge and given an electrical chair death sentence. Good sent harsh, mocking letters to the parents of his victims while they were awaiting execution. He was despised as the most hated man on death row and routinely mistreated by other prisoners. When he passed their cells, some prisoners threw objects at him. Ted Bundy, who was more crafty than the others, managed to take cookies off Good's dinner tray. Good had fantasies the day before his execution of escaping and surviving. "I don't want people to think I'm crazy because I like molesting children. I'm competent. I'm aware that what I've done is wrong. I'm proud of the fact that I murdered 2 boys as protest to society." During a news conference the night before he passed away, he admitted, "Yes, I asked the guard to bring in a 9-year-old boy so I could have relations with a little boy for one last time before they kill me." For his last meal, he ordered steak. His last words were, "I have remorse for the 2 boys I murdered, but it's hard for me to show it." James Adams, May 10, 1984, electrocution. Adams, 47, became the first black man to be put to death in Florida since 1964. His execution came as punishment for the brutal 1973 murder of Edgar Brown, a wealthy rancher from Fort Pierce. During a robbery at Brown's house, Adams attacked the millionaire and beat him to death using a fireplace poker. Witnesses later reported seeing Adams' Rambler leaving the crime scene shortly after the killing. In the ensuing investigation, police discovered several items stolen from Brown's residence inside the vehicle owned by Adams' wife, further linking him to the crime. At the time of the murder, Adams was a fugitive, having escaped from a Tennessee prison where he had been serving a 99-year sentence for SA. His violent history, combined with the evidence recovered from the robbery, ultimately led to his conviction and execution. His last words were a message to the other men on death row. He said, "To all the men on death row, keep on fighting because it is wrong and immoral. I have no animosity toward anyone. I only have love." He also told reporters beforehand that he wouldn't hesitate to walk like a man to his death, and reportedly he did so. There are no records of his final meal. Carl Elson Schreiner, June 20, 1984, electrocution. Schreiner, 30, was executed in the electric chair for the murder of Judith Ann Carter, a 32-year-old convenience store clerk from Gainesville. Carter was shot 5 times during the violent attack, which occurred while Schreiner was out on parole following a prior conviction for armed robbery. Born into a large family of 10 children, Schreiner's descent into crime began alarmingly early. He committed his first offense at just 8 years old. His troubled background and lifelong pattern of criminal behavior ultimately culminated in the fatal shooting that led to his death sentence. Before his execution, he made a final statement referencing his religious faith and looking forward to being with the Lord. The night before his execution, Schreiner consumed a large meal. It included steak, potatoes, corn on the cob, salad, cantaloupe, and strawberries with ice cream, and the prison spokesman reported that he ate all of it. David Leroy Washington, July 13, 1984, electrocution. Over the course of 10 terrifying days in September 1976, David Leroy Washington unleashed a wave of violence across Dade County, Florida, committing a series of crimes that included torture, kidnapping, and 3 brutal murders. After the killing spree came to an end, Washington voluntarily surrendered to authorities. He not only confessed to all 3 murders, but also entered guilty pleas for each of them. His attorney, William Tunke, strongly advised against pleading guilty, believing it was a grave mistake. Nevertheless, Washington remained adamant. During the sentencing phase, an essential step in all capital cases, Tunke made little effort to defend his client. He failed to call any character witnesses. He did not introduce psychiatric evaluations or expert testimony that could have provided insight into Washington's mental state, and neglected to request a pre-sentence report which might have been used to argue for a lesser sentence. As a result, Washington was sentenced to death. In the years that followed, he appealed his conviction and sentence, contending that his Sixth Amendment right to effective legal counsel had been violated due to his attorney's failure to adequately represent him during the sentencing proceedings. David Leroy Washington's last words before his execution were an apology to his victims' families and a message to his daughter. He stated, "I'd like to say to the families of my victims, I'm sorry for all the grief and heartache I brought to them. If my death brings them any satisfaction, so be it." To his daughter, who was on his lap shortly before he was taken to the electric chair, he said, "I want you to do better." His last meal was fried shrimp, fried oysters, French fries, hot rolls, a quart of vanilla ice cream. He asked for half a pint, but when they couldn't find one, he was given a quart, and lemonade. Ernest John Dobert Jr., September 7, 1984, electrocution. Dobert Jr., 46, was found guilty of second-degree murder for the death of his son Ryder and the murder of his 9-year-old daughter Kellyanne in 1971. The bodies were never found. The judge overruled the jury's 10-2 decision to condemn Dobert to life in prison and instead sentenced him to death. Following a heartfelt reconciliation with Honor, another daughter, Dobert was put to death on September 7, 1984. He made no formal final statement. When the prison superintendent, Richard Duggar, asked him if he had any last words, he calmly shook his head and twice said "no, no" into the microphone. However, just before the power was turned on, he winked at his attorney and minister and mouthed words that looked like "I love you." Dobert refused the special last meal. He was offered the standard prison breakfast of chipped beef on toast, but he also declined to eat that. He spent his final hours with his family members, including his mother, sisters, and 17-year-old daughter. James Dupree Henry, September 20, 1984, electrocution. Henry, 34, rejected a plea agreement that would have spared his life by allowing him to plead guilty to the March 23, 1984 murder of Orlando civil rights activist Zellie Riley in exchange for a life sentence. Instead, Henry chose to go to trial for the crime. On the night of the murder, Henry broke into Riley's home with the intent to rob him. During the burglary, he stole $64 in cash along with several credit cards. However, the encounter turned deadly when Henry gagged Riley, causing him to suffocate and die from strangulation. When authorities later moved in to arrest him, Henry resisted and managed to slightly wound a police officer in the process. At trial, the jury voted 7-5 in favor of recommending the death penalty, a narrow margin that ultimately sealed his fate.
Acting as God, and they say, well, you did this, you did that, we're going to kill you because of that. I had prepared myself, mentally to try to keep myself together. I could be next, ain't no telling. And if it comes to that, what good is fear going to do? It's not going to do anything. It's not going to bring me out of this madness.
Henry was executed in the electric chair on September 20, 1984. His last words were an assertion of his innocence. He said, "My final words are, I am innocent." His statement was reportedly barely audible to the witnesses because the microphone was not working properly. He also winked at his attorney just before the execution. For his final meal, Henry requested a dozen oysters mixed with hot sauce and crackers. He had never eaten oysters before, but he finished the dozen along with a half a cantaloupe and a glass of grapefruit juice, though he refused an offer of more oysters. Timothy Charles Palms, November 8, 1984, and Ronald John Michael Strait, May 20, 1986, electrocution. On July 30, 1976, Strait was granted a mandatory conditional parole by the Florida Parole and Probation Commission. Within a few weeks, by early September, he had made his way to Jacksonville, where he took up residence in an apartment shared by Timothy Palms, Jane Albert, and Albert's 7-year-old daughter. Jane Albert was employed as a secretary for James Stone, the owner of a local furniture store. During conversations about Stone's business, Strait and Palms devised a plan and presented it to Albert. They suggested that they could help Stone recover overdue payments from delinquent customers, proposing that in return they receive 40% of whatever money they successfully collected. Stone declined their proposal after realizing that Strait and Palms intended to use violence against any debtors who refused to pay. However, he still offered a small gesture of goodwill. He gave Strait $100 to buy new clothes and told Palms that there might soon be a full-time job opening at his store. By late September, Stone had decided against hiring Palms. Enraged by the rejection, Palms confided in Strait and another acquaintance, saying, I'm going to kill him. Strait responded that he should be the one to do it, feeling personally insulted by Stone's offer of money. The two men agreed to carry out the murder after the beginning of October, once the store had received its monthly payments from customers. On Sunday, October 3, 1976, Strait, Palms, and Jane Albert went out together and bought lumber, cement, metal reinforcements, and screws, materials they used to build the coffin weighed down to ensure it would sink. The following morning, Albert lured James Stone away from his furniture store and brought him to her apartment. When he arrived, Albert's 7-year-old daughter directed him toward the back bedroom, where Strait and Palms were waiting. As soon as he entered the back bedroom, they attacked him, striking him repeatedly with a hammer before binding his hands and feet with wire. Once restrained, they forced him into the wooden box they had constructed. For roughly 30 agonizing minutes, they subjected Stone to a brutal assault, beating him mercilessly, severing several of his fingers, and inflicting other forms of torture. Throughout the ordeal, Stone pleaded desperately for his life, but his cries were ignored. In the end, the two men brought the horrific attack to a close by stabbing Stone 18 times with a machete and a butcher knife, killing him. Afterward, they robbed him of his possessions, taking his watch, cash, and vehicle. At the same time, Jane Albert stole $2,800 from Stone's furniture store. The group then disposed of the body, placing the weighted coffin containing Stone's remains into the St. Johns River. Soon after, Albert, her daughter, Palms, and Strait fled Florida and headed for California. Their escape, however, was short-lived. When law enforcement officers eventually tracked them down, Strait resisted arrest and opened fire on the police before being subdued. In exchange for her cooperation with authorities, Jane Albert was granted immunity from prosecution and agreed to testify as a key witness for the state. Following his arrest, Palms confessed to the crime, which led investigators to the discovery and recovery of the coffin containing James Stone's body from the St. Johns River. Both Palms and Strait were tried separately for first-degree murder. Despite their attempts to defend themselves, each was found guilty and ultimately sentenced to death for their roles in the brutal killing. When asked if he had a final statement, Strait replied, "No, sir, nothing." He did, however, chew gum and wink at the witnesses in the chamber just before his execution. He declined a special last meal request. Instead, he simply drank chocolate milk, a quart of it, and turned down the standard prison meal offered to him. Palm's last words were, "My family's love has been my strength. That's all, goodbye." His final meal was a T-bone steak, eggs, hash brown potatoes, biscuits, orange juice, and coffee. James David Rollerson, January 30, 1985, electrocution. On April 27, 1975, Rollerson, accompanied by his accomplice Jerry Leon Tent, carried out an armed robbery at the Sally Maker restaurant in Jacksonville, Florida. During the course of the crime, Rollerson brutally assaulted and essayed a female employee after forcing her into a back room. While the robbery was still in progress, police officers James English and Michael Stewart responded to the call and arrived at the scene. A fierce gunfight broke out between the robbers and the officers. In the exchange of fire, both Tent and Officer Stewart were fatally shot. Ballistic evidence later confirmed that the bullets responsible for Officer Stewart's death had been fired from Rollerson's weapon.
The way I look at it is like I expect society is going to have to kill 5, 6, maybe 10 people before they stop and realize that what we're doing is we're killing people. And it's just like we're supposed to be one of the most enlightened societies, and what it is like they're saying, well, killing someone is the most brutal thing in the world, and we really value life, and we're going to kill you to prove it.
Have you thought about it a lot?
No, very little, really. I mean, the most it is just like us sitting here thinking that one day, James, you're going to grow old and you're going to die. Death is just a way of life. So dying in the electric chair doesn't really scare me. It's, no big deal.
In his final words, Rollerson said, "I am innocent." He declined a special last meal request. As a result, he was given the standard final meal offered to condemned inmates at the time, which was a breakfast of steak and eggs. He did not eat the meal. Johnny Paul Witt, March 6, 1985, electrocution. He was found guilty of first-degree murder for the death of 11-year-old Jonathan Kushner on October 28, 1973. Witt, who was 30 years old at the time, went hunting with a bow and arrow with Gary Tillman, a younger acquaintance. The two reportedly followed people like animal prey and had previously discussed killing a human. Witt and Tillman were hunting in a forested area close to a trail where usually kids were playing on the day of the murder. The victim was probably riding his bicycle down the trail through the neighborhood when Tillman struck him in the head with a drill bit. Witt then helped Tillman gag Kushner and put him in Witt's car's trunk. Tillman pulled into an empty grove and unlocked the trunk. Due to suffocation from the gag, the victim had already died. After digging the Kushner boy's grave, the two cut his tummy to prevent it from bloating. Witt and Tillman essayed the little boy's body before burying him. When asked by the prison superintendent if he had any final words before the sentence was carried out, Witt declined, stating, "No, I don't have any." He had also refused to speak to prison officials for several days leading up to his execution. He declined to have a final meal. He also reportedly turned down a minister in his final hours. Gary Tillman, Witt's accomplice, received a life sentence and is currently incarcerated at the Graceville Correctional Facility in Florida. He avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to the murder as part of a plea agreement with prosecutors. This was due to a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and lawyers feared that he might successfully use an insanity defense if the case went to a capital trial. Under Florida's laws at the time, Tillman became eligible for parole consideration after serving 25 years. A parole hearing was held back in 1997, where the victim's family and law enforcement officials testified against his release. The parole board ultimately set a tentative release date for the year 2100, ensuring he would almost certainly die in prison. Florida Department of Corrections inmate records for Gary Tillman show an active status with a life sentence for first-degree murder, so he is still alive today. He was 19 years old at the time of the murder, and he is 62 years old now. Marvin Francois, May 29, 1985, electrocution. He was executed in Florida for the murder of 6 people during a 1976 armed robbery of a drug house in Carroll City near Miami. His mask reportedly fell off during the robbery, and he decided that all people present who had seen his face had to be killed. 6 victims were shot in the head with a shotgun and died, while 2 others were wounded but survived and testified against him. Francois' last words were a condemnation of the white race and the justice system. In a written statement and then verbally, he said, "If there is such a thing as an antichrist, it ain't one man, but the whole white race. My death ends my tears and the fortune of watching my race slowly die. I am a black American, Ashanti Ankobia. I join my ancestors." For his final meal, he requested and ate a large and specific assortment of food: lobster, shrimp, ribs, chicken, and French fries. Daniel Morris Thomas, April 15, 1986, electrocution. He was executed for the murder of Charles Anderson, a University of Florida professor, during a home invasion robbery on January 1, 1976. As Anderson lay dying of 5 gunshot wounds, Thomas essayed his wife, Betty Anderson, and looted their home. Thomas was identified as the leader of the notorious Ski Mask Gang, which was reportedly responsible for a string of racially motivated crimes in Central Florida, including 2 murders, 5 essays, and several beatings. Upon entering the death chamber, Daniel Morris Thomas struggled violently with guards. After being restrained, he calmed down and read a prepared statement in a low voice. He stated that prisoners were human tools, political pawns, political human sacrifices for the politicians, and he urged people to stop politicians from using the death penalty and death row inmates for their political careers. For his last meal, Thomas requested a substantial amount of food, including lobster, steak, barbecued chicken, pecan pie, a donut, and grape juice. However, he ultimately refused to eat any of it. David Livingston Funches, April 22, 1986, electrocution. He was executed for the stabbing murders of 2 people during an armed robbery in a Jacksonville bar in December 1974. The victims were 52-year-old employee Anna Waldrop and 56-year-old customer Clayton Reagan. A third victim, Bertha McLeod, who was also severely injured, died 2.5 years later, though Funches was not tried for her death. His case generated significant attention because he was a decorated Vietnam War veteran, Purple Heart recipient, diagnosed with PTSD, which his attorneys argued was a mitigating factor that was not a recognized diagnosis at the time of his original 1975 trial. He did not make a final verbal statement into the microphone. Instead, as he was being strapped into the electric chair, he looked at his attorney, Susan Carey, and mouthed the words, "I love you." He also declined to order a special last meal. He did, however, eat a bowl of vanilla ice cream before his execution. Beaufort White, August 28, 1987, electrocution. He was executed as an accomplice for the murder of 6 people during the 1976 Carroll City massacre. White, along with Marvin Francois and John Errol Ferguson, participated in an armed home invasion and robbery of a drug house. White acted as a lookout during the shootings. When asked by the prison superintendent if he had any last words, Beaufort White said, "No, sir." The specific details of his final meal are not widely reported in the search results. However, general accounts suggest he did not order a special last meal, or he simply accepted the standard prison meal. The records indicate he spent his final hours quietly, but they do not list specific food items like some other cases. Willie Jasper Darden, March 15, 1988, electrocution. He was executed for the murder and armed robbery of James Carl Thurman on September 8, 1973, in Lakeland, Florida. Darden was interrupted by Thurman while he was robbing the furniture store owner's wife, Helen Thurman, of $15. He shot James Thurman and the 16-year-old neighbor boy, Philip Arnold, who survived, and then he essayed Mrs. Thurman. His case became a national and international cause due to claims of an unfair trial, alleged racial bias, and questions regarding the effectiveness of his legal counsel. He spent 14 years on death row, longer than any other inmate at the time, before his execution in the electric chair. Darden's last words were a strong assertion of his innocence and a message of peace. "I was not guilty for the charge for which I was arrested, and this morning I tell you I am not guilty of the charge for which I am about to be executed. I go this morning with a clear conscience. I bear no guilt, and I'm at peace with myself, with the world, with each of you. God bless you." He declined a special last meal request. Jeffrey Joseph Doherty, November 7, 1988 electrocution. He was executed for the March 1, 1976 murder of Lavone Patricia Saylor, whom he shot 5 times after picking her up hitchhiking and robbing her. He was a serial killer convicted of 4 other murders in Florida and Pennsylvania during a 2-week crime spree with his girlfriend, Bonnie Jean Heath. Doherty gave a 6-minute final statement before his execution. He expressed his belief that his death would make him free and criticized the justice system. "I am going to be free, and I hope with all my heart I will be the last sacrificial lamb of a system that is not just, and all these people know it is not just. Let's hope there are not many more that have to be sacrificed. The executions serve no purpose." He declined the standard final meal offered by the prison, which included steak, potatoes, beans, corn, ice cream, milk, and fruit punch. However, during a final visit with his father earlier in the day, he accepted root beer and ice cream, which his father had purchased for him. Bonnie Jean Heath received a 25-year prison sentence in exchange for her testimony against Jeffrey Joseph Doherty. She was released from prison on July 10, 1987, after serving just over 10 years behind bars. Theodore Robert Bundy, January 24, 1989 electrocution. Bundy was executed in Florida for the essay and murder of 2 Florida State University sorority sisters, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, in January 1978, and the kidnapping and murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach 3 weeks later. He received 3 death sentences across 2 separate trials in Florida for these crimes. Ted Bundy confessed to 30 homicides committed in 7 different states, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, and Florida, between 1974 and 1978, though the actual number of his victims may be higher, speculated to be over 100. His methodology typically involved using his charm and feigned vulnerability, sometimes using a fake arm cast or posing as an authority figure like a police officer, to lure young women to his car or a secluded location. Once isolated, he would bludgeon them unconscious, restrain them with handcuffs, and then drive them to a remote location to be assayed and killed. Bundy targeted young, attractive white women, mostly college students with long hair parted in the middle, who often resembled an old girlfriend who had rejected him. He was an organized killer who meticulously planned his crimes and ensured minimal forensic evidence was left behind, often by disposing of bodies in remote, forested areas, where he would actually return to perform sex acts on the corpses until decomposition made it impossible. In some cases, he broke into homes at night and bludgeoned and strangled his victims in their sleep, such as during the infamous Chi Omega sorority house attacks in Florida. He kept souvenirs from his victims, sometimes including clothing or body parts, which he would use to relive the murders through fantasy. His crimes evolved in brutality over time, culminating in the Chi Omega house rampage, where he attacked 4 women in a single night, killing 2, and then the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach shortly after. He was eventually convicted based on eyewitness testimony from an escaped victim and a survivor, hair and fiber evidence, and, crucially, a unique bite mark on one of the Chi Omega victims that matched his crooked teeth.
Ted, it is about 2:30 in the afternoon. You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind? What thoughts have you had in these last few days?
Well, I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I am in control of or something that I've come to terms with, because I haven't. It's a moment-by-moment thing. Sometimes I feel very tranquil, and other times I don't feel tranquil at all. What's going through my mind right now is to use the minutes and hours that I have left as fruitfully as possible and see what happens. It helps to live in the moment in the essence that we use it productively. So right now I'm feeling calm, and in large part because I'm here with you.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
When asked if he had any last words, Bundy, in a shaking voice, replied, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." He was speaking to his attorney Jim Coleman and Fred Lawrence, a Methodist minister who had spent the night praying with him. Ted Bundy refused to order a special last meal request. As a result, he was served the standard prison final meal, which included steak, eggs, hash browns, toast with butter and jelly, coffee, milk, and juice. He did not touch any of the food. Before we continue, with the holidays coming up, I just wanted to share something special. I've published my very first true crime quiz books on Amazon. They're such a fun gift idea for anyone who loves true crime or serial killer trivia. You can grab the one that interests you most or get all three for less and make it a fun game night with friends or family. It's my first time creating something like this, so your support honestly means so much to me. And if you do get one, I'd be really grateful if you could leave an honest review. It will help me learn and do even better next time. You can find all the links down below in the description. Alright, let's get back to the next case. Aubrey Dennis Adams Jr., May 4, 1989, electrocution. He was executed for the kidnapping, attempted sexual battery, and murder of 80-year-old Trissa Gale Thornley in Ocala in January 1978. Adams, a former prison guard, made an obscene phone call to the girl's home and then lured her into his car, later suffocating her when she started screaming. Her naked and mutilated body was found in a plastic bag 2 months later. Aubrey Adams left a written statement that was read after his execution. "I hope and pray that all the new and reopened wounds will be healed quickly after my passing. My death is the Lord's will, and I am now with my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ in heaven." Adams declined a special last meal. Prior to his execution, he did, however, consume some ice cream and coffee. Jesse Joseph Tafero, May 4, 1990, electrocution. He was executed for the 1976 murders of Florida Highway Patrol officer Philip Black and visiting Canadian Constable Donald Robert Irwin at an Interstate 95 rest stop. The execution was botched, with flames and smoke shooting from his head because a synthetic sponge was used instead of a natural one for conductivity.
The system of giving the death penalty is so discriminatory and racist and just unequal. Poor people get the death penalty. If you have a lawyer like F. Lee Bailey or someone similar, to that, it's very doubtful that you'd get a death penalty. Very, very doubtful, Most of the people up on death row are poor people, black people, minority groups, and people that just can't afford $50,000 to pay an attorney, or even $10,000 to pay an attorney. Most of the guys up there have public defenders, and public defenders are public defenders. And although they may fight, as good as they can, you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice of attorneys. And the choice of attorneys in serious cases is very important.
Tafero's last words were an indictment of the death penalty system. He said it was very arbitrary and capricious. He ate about half of his last meal, which included scrambled eggs, fried pepperoni, toasted Italian bread, 2 tomatoes, steamed broccoli, asparagus tips, fresh strawberry shortcake with real whipped cream, whole milk, and hot tea. Anthony Bortolotti, July 27, 1990, electrocution. He was executed for the stabbing murder, sexual battery, and robbery of Carol Miller Ward in September 1983. He tricked his way into her home by asking to use the phone, then robbed her of $30. He stabbed her repeatedly with 2 different knives, breaking the first one, and then essayed her as she lay dying. In letters to prosecutors after his conviction, he expressed no remorse and wrote that the victim should have locked her damn door and he had really did a favor by taking her life. Just before he was strapped into the chair, Bertolotti delivered a message of peace and love. I would like to say I leave with peace and love in my heart, no animosity. For those I love, be strong and know that God is with them. The specific details of his special last meal request are not detailed in available records, but it is known that he ate about half of a meal around 4:30 p.m. on the day of his execution. It was likely a standard prison meal, as he spent much of his final days focused on appeals regarding the functioning of the electric chair following a botched execution earlier that year. James William Hamblin, September 21, 1990, electrocution. Hamblin was convicted of killing Laureen Jean Edwards, the 34-year-old owner of a ladies' boutique in Jacksonville, during a robbery on April 24, 1984. Court records indicate he forced her into a changing room and shot her in the head after he realized she had tripped a silent alarm. He was also wanted in Texas for the murder of another woman. Hamblin did not make a formal final statement into the microphone. Instead, just before his execution, he smiled, winked, and stuck his tongue out at the witnesses who were present in the viewing area. He had also reportedly told the prison spokesman that he wished the victim's husband could be seated in a better place for the viewing, saying, "They are good people and they deserve better than this." Hamblin's last meal consisted of steak, eggs, French fries, toast, and tomato juice. He ate the meal around 4:30 a.m. on the morning of his execution. Raymond Robert Clark, November 19, 1990, electrocution. Clark was executed for the 1977 kidnapping, robbery, and murder of David Drake, a 49-year-old businessman and scrapyard owner from Treasure Island, Florida. Clark abducted Drake from a bank parking lot, forced him to write a $5,000 check at gunpoint, then drove him to a secluded area and shot him twice in the head. He and an accomplice then attempted to demand $10,000 in ransom from Drake's son, but police traced the calls and arrested them. Clark was on parole from California at the time of the murder, where he had served time for killing a 14-year-old boy. He did not make a formal final statement before his execution, and there are no records of his final meal. Roy Allen Herridge, April 24, 1991, electrocution. He was executed for the essay and murder of 18-year-old Carleen Gale Kelly and the attempted murder of her 17-year-old friend Deborah Miller. In June 1981, Herridge offered a ride to Kelly and Miller, who were hitchhiking near Daytona Beach. He drove them to a secluded, wooded area where he had a Mary Jane patch. At gunpoint, he forced them to undress and essayed Kelly. He then made both girls lie down behind his van, shot them in the back of the head, and slashed their throats. Kelly died, but Miller survived her severe injuries and later testified against Herridge in court. He used his last words to express his disappointment with the American criminal justice system, particularly in light of a recent Supreme Court decision that limited federal appeals for death row inmates. He stated, "I'm disappointed with the almost total lack of fairness in the American criminal justice system. This is truly a sad time in our country's history when political concerns take on more importance than the fundamental rights of the individual." For his last meal, he made a very large and specific request, and he ate all of it. Sirloin steak, broccoli casserole, onion rings, raspberry fritters, Brussels sprouts, sautéed mushrooms, chef salad, pineapple juice, garlic bread with provolone cheese, and olives. Bobby Marion Francis, June 25, 1991, electrocution. He was executed for the torture and murder of Titus Walters, a drug informant. In 1975, Francis killed Walters because the man had set him up for a narcotics dealing arrest. Francis was part of a group that held Walters in a home in Key West. Francis first shot Walters in the head, but the wound was not fatal. He then returned to the bathroom where the man was being held captive and fatally shot him through the heart. The victim's body, with bound hands and taped mouth, was later found in a bathtub. Francis was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death 3 separate times for this murder, with a judge overriding the jury's life recommendation in the third trial to impose the death penalty. Francis, a Muslim, began his final statement by chanting in Arabic, "There is no God but Allah, and Mohammed is his prophet." He then made a brief statement, reportedly in a low, almost inaudible voice, saying that he felt no animosity towards anyone. Francis declined the special last meal request. Earlier, the night before his execution, he had accepted and eaten ice cream and sipped Pepsi Cola during a visit with a friend and his religious advisor. Nolly Lee Martin, May 12, 1992, electrocution. He was executed for the 1977 essay and murder of 19-year-old Patricia Greenfield. Martin and an accomplice, Gary Forbes, abducted Greenfield at knife point from a convenience store in Delray Beach, Florida. After robbing the store and essaying her, Martin drove her to a local dump where he stabbed her to death. During his final statement, he expressed remorse for his actions and hoped that his death would prove relief. He said, "I guess I probably deserve this for what I did. I think my death will give me relief from the torture I've been through the last 15 years. I just hope that those involved, that they can understand when I say I'm sorry. I truly mean it." Martin ate very little of his last meal. Specific details of his request are not available, but a prison spokesman noted that he spent his final hours reading, watching TV, and chain smoking. Edward Dean Kennedy, July 21, 1992, electrocution. He was executed for the murders of Florida Highway Patrol Trooper Robert McDermott and McDermott's cousin, Floyd Cohn. Kennedy was already serving a life sentence for a previous murder, a motel clerk in Miami in 1978, when he escaped from the Union Correctional Institution on April 11, 1981. Hours after his escape, he broke into a home where he was stealing weapons when McDermott and Cohn entered. Kennedy shot and killed both men before being recaptured after a standoff. When asked if he had any last words just before being executed in the electric chair, he said to the witnesses present, "Peace be with you all." Kennedy did not have a special last meal, but he did eat a standard one offered earlier in the day. He had already received and partially consumed the last meal of steak and baked potato hours before a temporary stay of execution was granted in May 1992. On the actual day of his execution in July the same year, he reportedly ate some of the food provided but did not make a special request that has been specifically detailed in reports. Robert Dale Henderson, April 21, 1993, electrocution. Henderson was executed for the murders of 3 hitchhikers in Hernando County in February 1982. He was a spree killer who confessed to a total of 12 murders across 5 states, Ohio, South Carolina, Florida, Mississippi, and Louisiana, during a 2-week period in early 1982. When asked if he had any final words before the execution, Henderson replied, "No, sir, I don't." He remained impassive, stared straight ahead, and did not blink while being strapped into the electric chair. For his final meal, he requested and ate steak, lobster, tossed salad, bread and butter, and soda. Larry Joe Johnson, May 5, 1993, electrocution. He was executed for the murder of 67-year-old James Mack Haddon, a gas station attendant during a robbery in 1979. Johnson, who was a decorated Vietnam War veteran who suffered from PTSD, was convicted of the shotgun slaying during the course of the robbery. A jury initially recommended a life sentence, but the judge overrode the recommendation and imposed the death penalty. Johnson's defense argued that his PTSD, which was not an officially recognized disorder at the time of his 1980 trial, was a result of his combat service and should have been a mitigating factor, an argument which was ultimately rejected in his final appeals. When asked if he had any last words, Johnson declined, stating, "No, I don't." He was visibly frightened when led into the death chamber. For his final meal, Johnson requested and ate barbecue pork chops, coleslaw, blackberry cobbler, 1 roll, and Pepsi. Michael Allen Durocher, August 25, 1993, electrocution. He was executed for the 1983 murders of his girlfriend, Grace Reed, their 6-month-old son, Joshua Durocher, and Grace Reed's 5-year-old daughter, Candice Reed. He brought them from New Jersey to Florida around Thanksgiving, 1983. In one confession, he claimed a murder-suicide pact, but in another, he said he killed them because he wasn't sure Joshua was his son and welfare authorities were seeking child support. He took the victims to a secluded area in Clay County, where he shot Candice with a shotgun as she walked down a path after he told her they were going on a picnic. Then he stabbed his son Joshua to death. Finally, he shot Grace in the back of the head as she lay in a grave he had dug. He then buried their bodies in shallow graves, which were not discovered until 1990 after he confessed. In 1986, Durocher robbed and fatally shot Thomas Underwood III, a 27-year-old employee at a window decoration store. He stole approximately $30 or $40 from the victim's pockets and fled in Underwood's car. In 1988, he battered his 38-year-old roommate, Edward Eddie Dwayne Childers, to death with a claw hammer in his sleep. He claimed the man owed him 2 weeks' salary. He then took the body to a nearby lake, doused it in a flammable liquid, and set it on fire. He was arrested 3 weeks later after his 16-year-old girlfriend tipped off police that he had bragged about the murder. Durocher declined to make a final statement prior to his execution. For his last meal, he requested and was given 5 pounds of jumbo breaded shrimp, a pint of chocolate ice cream, and a 2-liter bottle of Coca-Cola or Pepsi. He ate about half of the food. Roy Allen Stewart, April 22, 1994, electrocution. He was executed for the essay and strangulation murder of a 77-year-old woman, Willie Mae Hayslip. Stewart was a neighbor of the victim. Testimony at his trial revealed that Mrs. Hayslip had invited Stewart into her home to make him a sandwich. While there, she found him attempting to steal her watch, leading to an argument. Stewart then severely beat the elderly woman, breaking 8 of her ribs. He then essayed her and strangled her with an electrical cord. A bite mark was identified on her thigh, and what appeared to be a bite mark was on her breast. Bloodstains and sign of a struggle were found throughout her living room and bedroom, indicating she fought for her life. Stewart confessed to the crime 3 times to police, once on tape and twice in writing, though he later tried to recant these confessions. He did not have any last words, and there are no records of his last meal. Bernard Bolender, July 18, 1995, electrocution. Bolender was executed for the kidnapping, torture, and murder of 4 men during a botched drug deal in 1980. On January 8, 1980, Bolender and 2 accomplices, Joseph Maker and Paul Thompson, kidnapped the 4 victims, John Marino, Scott Bennett, Rodolfo Ayan, and Nicomedes Hernandez, from Maker's Miami apartment during a drug transaction. The victims were robbed, beaten with a baseball bat, and tortured in an attempt to reveal more drugs. Hernandez was burned with a hot knife and shot in the leg before all 4 were repeatedly stabbed. Their bodies were then placed in a car which was set on fire and left on Interstate 95 in Miami. A jury convicted Bolender of 4 counts of first-degree murder, but unanimously recommended a sentence of life imprisonment. However, the trial judge overrode the jury's recommendation and sentenced him to death. Bolender read from a prepared, handwritten statement just before his execution on July 18, 1995. In it, he claimed that the courts and Florida Governor Lawton Chiles had turned a deaf ear to his pleas of innocence. He also included a message to young people in his statement. All of you, tell my story to every youth so that the worst of my life will not be repeated by them, and the trust and honesty I learned too late will save them. His last meal was ribs, a 16-ounce Delmonico steak, and 4 peaches. Jerry White, December 4, 1995, electrocution. He was executed in Florida for the 1981 murder of James Melson, a shopper at a grocery store that White was robbing in Orange County. During the armed robbery of the Alexander grocery store, Jerry White shot James Melson, a Vietnam veteran who died at the hospital. He also shot and paralyzed the store owner, George Alexander, who died of complications related to his injuries 4 years later. Forensic evidence indicated the victims were shot execution style at point-blank range from behind, refuting White's claim that the shootings were accidental. White was a repeated offender with a long criminal history and had been released from prison about a year before this crime. Before his execution, Jerry White made a final statement focusing on his religious beliefs. He urged those listening to turn to the Lord Jesus Christ as he had. He also prepared a written statement expressing sorrow for the pain he caused and stating he had confessed his sins. 3 hours before his execution, White requested and ate most of a last meal consisting of grilled round steak, French fried potatoes, coleslaw, toast, and orange juice. Philip Alexander Atkins, December 5, 1995, electrocution. He was executed for the kidnapping, battery, and murder of 6-year-old Antonio Castillo. Atkins abducted the young boy in their Lakeland neighborhood in September 1981. He drove him to a wooded area and molested him. When the boy threatened to tell his parents, Atkins severely beat him to death with a steel pipe and his fists. An autopsy revealed the child suffered around 30 blows to the head and neck. Atkins confessed to the crime, but the sexual battery charges were dropped due to lack of independent physical evidence at the time, although the judge considered the circumstances during sentencing. In a statement, Atkins apologized to the victim's family and referenced his religious beliefs, stating, "Man might destroy the body, but he cannot destroy the soul, and I am ready to go on the other side and meet the Lord, my master." He declined the standard offer of a final meal, opting instead for 2 glasses of orange juice. John Earl Bush, October 21, 1996, electrocution. Bush was executed for the abduction, robbery, stabbing, and shooting death of 18-year-old Frances Julia Slater, who was working an all-night shift at a convenience store. In October 1982, Bush and 3 accomplices, J.B. Parker, Alfonso Cave, and Terry Wayne Johnson, robbed a convenience store in Martin County, stealing $134 from the register. They then forced Slater into their car, drove about 13 miles to a secluded area, pulled her out by her hair, and proceeded to shoot and stab her to death. Although a coroner's report indicated she died from a gunshot wound allegedly inflicted by Parker, Bush was convicted of first-degree murder for his integral role in the crime. He did not make a formal final statement in the death chamber. When asked if he had any last words, he silently shook his head no. For his last meal, he requested steak, shrimp, lemon pie, 3 glasses of orange juice. John Mills Jr., December 6, 1996, electrocution. He was executed for the murder and bludgeoning of Lester Lohan during a 1982 robbery. In March 1982, John Mills Jr. and an accomplice, Michael Frederick, knocked on the door of Lester Lohan's trailer in a bid to rob it. They abducted Lohan and took him to a nearby airstrip where he was beaten with a tire iron. Mills then shot and killed the victim as he tried to escape. Mills had several prior burglary convictions at the time of the murder, and the court found the aggravating circumstances of the murder far outweighed any possible mitigating circumstances leading to his death sentence. As a convert to Islam, having changed his name in prison to Yohanna Abdullah Muhammad, Mills's last words were a religious declaration in Arabic. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad is the messenger of God." He declined a special last meal request. He also refused to eat the standard prison meal offered to him on the day of his execution, which consisted of steak, fried potatoes, and orange juice. Pedro Medina, March 25, 1997, electrocution. He was executed for the murder of 52-year-old Dorothy James, a schoolteacher who had befriended him. Medina, a Cuban refugee who arrived during the 1980 Mariel boat lift, was convicted of robbing and fatally stabbing James in her Orlando apartment in 1982. The trial judge sentenced him to death despite a jury recommendation of life imprisonment by a 10-2 vote. His case gained notoriety because his execution was botched, flames and thick smoke shot from his head, leading to significant controversy and a review of the electric chairs used in Florida. Maintaining his innocence until the end, Medina's last words were, "I am still innocent." For his final meal, he requested and was given a large meal, which included Delmonico steak with onion gravy, French fries, salad, black beans and rice, American cheese, butter pecan ice cream with strawberry topping, coconut cream pie, and a Pepsi. Gerald Eugene Stano, March 23, 1998, electrocution. He was executed for the murder of Kathy Lee Scharf. Stano was a prolific serial killer who confessed to murdering 41 young women and teenage girls across Florida and Pennsylvania between 1969 and 1980. He was convicted of 9 murders and received 8 life sentences and 1 death sentence. The execution was for the murder of 17-year-old Kathy Lee Scharf, whom he picked up while she was hitchhiking in January 1974. He stabbed her and left her body in the woods. He waived his appeals and volunteered for the death penalty. When asked if he had any last words, Stano declined to make a final statement, simply shaking his head no. For his final meal, he requested and ate 1 pound of M&Ms, a cup of hot coffee, a half-gallon of vanilla Haagen-Dazs ice cream, a slice of coconut cream pie, 2 slices of lemon meringue pie. Leo Alexander Jones, March 24, 1998, electrocution. He was executed for the murder of police officer Thomas J. Zafransky. On May 23, 1981, officers of Fransky was shot in the head while sitting in his patrol car at an intersection in Jacksonville, Florida. Jones, an immediate neighbor to where the shots were fired, was arrested shortly after. He later signed a confession statement admitting to taking a rifle from his apartment, going to an empty apartment downstairs, and shooting the policeman through the window. Despite his confession, the case was highly controversial, as Jones later recanted this statement, claiming it was coerced by police who beat him during interrogation. Multiple witnesses later came forward claiming another man, Glenn Schofield, had confessed to the killing, but these claims were dismissed in subsequent appeals due to procedural issues or lack of credibility. As a convert to Islam, Jones's final words were a religious recitation in Arabic. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger." He reportedly repeated this phrase or mouthed it multiple times with his religious advisor just before the execution. He declined a special last meal request. He was offered the standard prison breakfast of steak, fried eggs and potatoes, toast and orange juice at 4:30 a.m. on the morning of his execution, but he stated he just didn't think he could eat that day and did not consume it. Judy Buenoano, March 30, 1998 electrocution. Judy Buenoano, often referred to as the Black Widow, was executed for the 1971 arsenic poisoning murder of her husband, Air Force Sergeant James Goodyear. Her primary motive for this and other crimes was life insurance money. She collected over $240,000 from these schemes. Her confirmed and suspected crimes include murder of husband James Goodyear in 1971. This was the crime for which she was eventually executed. She poisoned her Air Force sergeant husband with arsenic shortly after he returned from Vietnam. His death was initially attributed to natural causes, but an exhumation later confirmed lethal levels of arsenic in his remains. The murder of boyfriend Bobby Joe Morris, 1978. Morris, a boyfriend in Colorado, also died of arsenic poisoning. She was never charged with his murder because by the time authorities connected her to the death, she had already been sentenced to death in Florida. Murder of son Michael Buenoano, 1980. Her 19-year-old son Michael became severely ill with symptoms consistent with arsenic poisoning, which led to paralysis in his legs and one arm. On May 13, 1980, she took him on a canoe trip, and the canoe rolled over. Michael, weighed down by his leg braces and not wearing a life jacket, drowned. She collected $100,000 in life insurance money after his death. Attempted murder of fiancé John Gentry, 1983. Gentry, a wallpaper businessman she was dating, was severely injured when his car exploded in a parking lot. An investigation revealed that 5 sticks of dynamite had been rigged to the car's tail lights. She had also been giving him vitamin pills that were found to contain arsenic and paraformaldehyde. She had recently increased his life insurance policy significantly. She was sentenced to 12 years for this attempted murder. Buenoano was also suspected of a 1974 murder in Alabama and the 1980 death of another boyfriend, Gerald Dossett, but she was not charged with those crimes. Her arrest for the car bombing led investigators to uncover the pattern of mysterious deaths around her, earning her the nickname the Black Widow. When asked if she had any last words just before her execution in the electric chair, Judy Buenoano said, "No, sir." For her final meal, she had a specific all-vegetarian request and ate all of it: steamed broccoli, asparagus, strawberries, tomato wedges, hot tea with lemon. Daniel Eugene Remeta, March 31, 1998, electrocution. Remeta was executed for the murder of 60-year-old Merle Chet Reeder, a convenience store clerk in Ocala, on February 8, 1985. The shooting was part of a multi-state crime spree in which Remeta and accomplices were linked to a total of 5 murders in Florida, Arkansas, and Kansas. He was convicted and sentenced to death in both Florida and Arkansas, but he was executed in Florida. Daniel Remeta did not make a formal final statement in the death chamber. He was described as calm and expressionless when strapped into the electric chair, but he did nod to someone among the witnesses before the hood was lowered. For his final meal, he requested snow cones. The specific flavors or quantity are not detailed, but reports mention this unusual request. Alan Lee Davis, July 8, 1999, electrocution. Davis was executed for the 1982 murders of Nancy Whaler and her 2 young daughters, Christina, 9, and Catherine, 5, in Jacksonville. Davis, who had a lengthy criminal history and was on parole for armed robbery at the time, broke into the Whaler home with the initial motive to assay one of the children. He proceeded to brutally murder all three occupants. Nancy Whaler, who was also 3 months pregnant, was beaten almost beyond recognition in the face and head with a magnum. She was struck more than 25 times. Christina Whaler was tied up and shot twice in the face. Catherine Whaler was shot as she tried to run away, and then her skull was beaten in with the gun. Davis declined to make a formal final statement before his execution. For his last meal, he requested and received a large dinner: 1 lobster tail, fried potatoes, a half-pound of fried shrimp, 6 ounces of fried clams, half a loaf of garlic bread, and 32 ounces of A&W root beer. Terry Melvin Sims, February 23, 2000, lethal injection. Sims was executed for the murder of George Fayol, an off-duty Seminole County Reserve deputy sheriff. On December 29, 1977, Sims and 3 accomplices committed an armed robbery at the Longwood Village Pharmacy in Longwood, Florida. Sims and another man entered the pharmacy while the others waited in a getaway car. George Fayol, a retired New York City police officer who volunteered as a reserve deputy, entered the store to pick up a prescription for his wife. Upon seeing the situation, Fayol exchanged gunfire with Sims. The man was shot twice and killed, while Sims was wounded in the hip but managed to flee the scene and the state. He was later arrested in California in 1978 after another failed robbery attempt. He then was extradited to Florida to stand trial. Sims consistently maintained his innocence, and issues were raised during appeals regarding who the actual triggerman was, as well as the plea bargains offered to his accomplices, who received only 2-year prison terms. He was the first person executed in Florida by lethal injection after the previous execution, Alan Lee Davis, by electric chair, was considered botched. Sims' final words were, "I love my family. I love all my friends and my rabbi." For his last meal, he requested a dinner with several items, some of which he shared with guards and another inmate: French fries, chef's salad, Boston cream pie, and cola. Anthony Braden Bryan, February 24, 2000, lethal injection. Bryan was executed for the kidnapping, armed robbery, and murder of 60-year-old George Wilson, a night watchman. In 1983, Bryan and an accomplice kidnapped and robbed George Wilson after their boat broke down. They took Wilson to a wooded area, tied him up, and Bryan shot him. Before his execution, Bryan, who had become a born-again Christian, read a final statement expressing his faith and gratitude. His last meal consisted of fish, brown rice, a chef's salad, asparagus, apple pie with vanilla ice cream, Coca-Cola, and whole milk. Benny Eddie Demps, June 7, 2000, lethal injection. Demps was executed for the 1976 murder of fellow inmate Alfred Sturgis at Florida State Prison. He was already serving life sentences for a 1971 double murder, and he was accused of involvement in the fatal stabbing of Sturgis, an alleged prison snitch. Sturgis, while dying, reportedly named Demps, James Jackson, and Harry Mungin as his attackers, stating that Demps and Mungin held him down while Jackson stabbed him. Jackson and Mungin received life sentences, but Demps was sentenced to death primarily due to the aggravating factor of his prior murder convictions. Demps maintained his innocence in the prison murder until the end, claiming it was a frame-up and that exculpatory evidence was withheld from his defense. Before his execution, he made a lengthy 7-minute statement in which he claimed he was an innocent man who had been butchered during the preparation for his lethal injection, as technicians struggled to find a suitable vein and he bled profusely. He said, "This is not an execution, it's murder." He also said he left the world hating no man, with no malice toward anyone, and concluded with a prayer. Demps requested a large last meal, of which he ate about half. It included various items such as barbecued chicken and beef, French fries, Spanish rice, rolls, ice cream, a mango, banana pudding, and a Pepsi. Thomas Harrison Provenzano, June 21, 2000, lethal injection. He was executed for the January 10, 1984 shooting rampage at the Orange County Courthouse in Orlando that resulted in 3 deaths and a permanent paralysis. Provenzano, an unemployed electrician, held a grudge against 2 police officers who had previously charged him with disorderly conduct. He arrived at the courthouse heavily armed, and a shootout ensued when bailiffs attempted to search him. The shooting resulted in the deaths of William Arnold Arnie Wilkerson, a 60-year-old bailiff, Harry Dalton, a 53-year-old bailiff who died of his injuries 7 years later, Mark Parker, a 19-year-old correctional officer who died in 2009 due to complications from his injuries. Provenzano's mental health was a significant legal issue as he claimed to be Jesus Christ and believed his execution was due to people hating Jesus. A judge determined he was competent for execution as he understood he was being put to death for his crime. Just before the lethal injection began, Provenzano looked at his attorney, Michael Reiter, and said, "Thanks for everything, Mike." He declined to have a special last meal and he did not eat the standard dinner offered by the prison system. Dan Patrick Hauser, August 25, 2000, lethal injection. Hauser was executed for the murder of 21-year-old Melanie Rodriguez, a strip club employee, on New Year's Day in 1995. Hauser, who was a drifter, lured Rodriguez back to his motel room in Fort Walton Beach with an offer of money. After having relations, he strangled her to death to satisfy a long-held urge to kill and to watch the fear in her eyes. He later stashed her body under a mattress and fled the state. He was arrested in Reno, Nevada, about a month later for stealing a pickup truck, and then he confessed to the murder. Hauser pleaded guilty and actively fought against any appeals on his behalf, writing a gruesome confession of the deliberate, torturous killing to ensure he received the death penalty, which he believed was the appropriate punishment. He did not make a final statement. When asked by the warden if he had any last words, he did not react or speak. He also did not order a special final meal. He had an Asian food dinner on the Tuesday before his execution, which was initially scheduled for that day, but it was stayed. After the stay was lifted and his execution rescheduled for Friday, he consumed only candy bars and crackers from the prison canteen. Robert Dewey Glock II, January 11, 2001, lethal injection. Glock was executed in Florida for the kidnapping, armed robbery, and murder of 34-year-old Sherilyn Ritchie, a schoolteacher. On August 16, 1983, Glock and his accomplice, Carl Puyatti, kidnapped Ritchie at gunpoint from a shopping mall parking lot. They stole her car and wedding ring, forced her to withdraw $100 from an ATM, and then drove her to a secluded orange grove. Initially, they decided to let her go, but then they changed their minds, fearing she would be able to identify them. They returned to the site and shot her multiple times until she died, clutching her husband's baseball glove to her chest. Glock and Puyatti were later arrested when stopped for an obscured license plate and confessed to the crime. Glock offered an apology for his actions in the death chamber, an apology he had started giving to the warden while doctors tried to find a vein for the lethal injection. His full final statement was, "Hey everybody, I killed Mrs. Ritchie. I'm sorry for it. I'm ready to go see Jesus." He did not have a special last meal request. Rigoberto Sanchez Velasco, October 2, 2002, lethal injection. He was executed for the assay and murder of 11-year-old Kathy Esenaro, the daughter of his live-in girlfriend. In December 1986, while the victim's mother was at work, he attacked the girl in their home. He confessed to strangling her with her t-shirt until he thought she was dead, then undressing and assaying her before stealing her jewelry and leaving the apartment. Medical evidence indicated the victim was alive during the assay and suffered significant pain before her death. He later confessed to this murder to police and at his trial, but denied it in a final statement issued after his execution. While on death row, he also fatally stabbed two other inmates in 1995, Edward Capret and Charles Street, for which he received additional 15-year sentences. He repeatedly stated his desire to drop his appeals and be executed, saying he hates people and wanted to die so he wouldn't be able to hurt anybody no more. As he was strapped to the gurney in the execution chamber, Sanchez Velasco looked at his attorney and a priest and said, "I love you, everybody." For his final meal, he requested and ate chicken fried rice, fish fillet, avocado salad, and cheesecake. Eileen Carol Wuornos, October 9, 2002, lethal injection. Wuornos was executed for the murders of 6 men she encountered while working as a sex worker along Florida highways in 1989 and 1990. She was convicted of shooting and robbing her male clients. While she initially claimed the homicides were committed in self-defense after the man attempted to assay her, she later stated in prison that she killed for profit and would do it again because she had hate crawling through her system. She received a total of 6 death sentences and eventually waived her appeals, expressing a desire for the execution to be carried out. Wuornos's last words were a bizarre and rambling statement related to her religious beliefs and the movie Independence Day. "I just like to say I'm sailing with The Rock and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6. Like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back, I'll be back." She declined the offer of a special last meal. Instead, she simply requested and was given a single cup of black coffee. Linroy Borosan, December 9, 2002, lethal injection. He was executed for the kidnapping, torture, and murder of 74-year-old postmistress Catherine Alexander. On October 26, 1979, Borosan robbed the Eatonville, Florida post office where Alexander worked, stealing cash and over $14,000 in money orders. He then abducted the postmistress, held her captive for approximately 83 hours, partially in a car trunk. Then he stabbed her 16 times and then fatally crushed her by running her over with his car to eliminate her as a witness. He was linked to the crime by the stolen money orders found in his home, the victim's shoes, and forensic evidence from his car. When asked if he had any last words, he said, "No, sir, no." He did not make any last statements before his execution. He also did not get a special meal on the day of his execution, as he had already been served one on an earlier date when his execution was postponed. His special last meal served on that prior occasion consisted of barbecued ribs, French fries and onion rings, coleslaw, apple pie, and milk. Amos Lee King Jr., February 26, 2003, lethal injection. King was executed for the assay and murder of 68-year-old Natalie Tilly Brady in her Tarpon Springs home in March 1977. At the time of the crime, King was serving a sentence for larceny of a firearm at a nearby work release facility. He left that facility and broke into Brady's home, which was close by, where he robbed, essayed, stabbed, beat, and set her home on fire. King was found with blood on his clothing when he returned to the facility and later stabbed the prison counselor. Evidence against him included his blood type matching the victim's, a knife matching a set in the victim's kitchen, and circumstantial evidence placing him at the scene. King maintained his innocence, alleging racism and planted evidence. His last words were, "I would like the governor and the family to know I am an innocent man, and the state had evidence to that effect. I'm sorry for the victim's family, for all the things we have gone through." He continued speaking after his microphone was turned off. He did not receive a special last meal because he had already received that meal during previous execution days. He ate the standard prison meal that day, which included smoked turkey sausage, rice, collard greens, pinto beans, cornbread, and cake with icing. Newton Carlton Slauson, May 16, 2003, lethal injection. Slauson was executed for the brutal murders of 4 members of his neighbor's family and an unborn child in Tampa in April 1989. He was convicted of the shooting deaths of Gerald Wood, 23, his wife Peggy Wood, 21, and their 2 young children, Jennifer, 4, and Glendon, 3. Peggy Wood was 8.5 months pregnant at the time. During the attack, which reportedly stemmed from a botched drug deal where Slauson claimed Gerald put crack cocaine in his beer, Slauson shot the family. In a particularly gruesome detail, after the shootings, Slauson used a knife to slice open Peggy Wood's abdomen, attempting to save the unborn male fetus, which also had multiple gunshot wounds and cuts and did not survive. Peggy Wood, despite her injuries, managed to crawl to her mother's house nearby and identified Newton as the killer before she died. Slauson waived his appeals and volunteered for execution. He made no formal final statement. When the warden asked him if he had anything to say, he simply told him, "No, sir." For his final meal, he requested and received a plate of battered fried scallops and a Coke. He ate this meal before his originally scheduled execution time the evening before he was actually executed, as the execution was temporarily stayed for a competency evaluation. Paul Jennings Hill, September 3, 2003, lethal injection. Hill was executed in Florida for the murders of Dr. John Bayard Britton and his bodyguard, James Herman Barrett, outside an abortion clinic in Pensacola in 1994. He also wounded Barrett's wife, June Barrett. Hill, a former Presbyterian minister and anti-abortion extremist, shot the victims with a 12-gauge shotgun on July 29, 1994, outside the clinic in Pensacola, Florida. He considered his actions justifiable homicide to prevent abortions and save unborn children, a view widely condemned. Hill represented himself in court and sought execution, reportedly believing it would make him a martyr, and encouraged further violence against abortion providers. He was the first person executed in the U.S. for killing an abortion doctor.
You ask why. Perhaps the most fundamental reason is the Sixth Commandment, thou shalt not murder, also requires the means necessary to defend innocent people, and that's what I did, was I used the means necessary to defend innocent people. I compare my actions in my mind to the shootings at the Columbine High School. If I had killed one of the murderers there at the Columbine High School, people would not have objected to my actions because I would have been saving born children that were grown up. But the fact that the people I saved were unseen and the murderers that I killed were legalized murderers, people don't get the connection. But yeah, if someone were standing on a playground with a rifle shooting children on the playground, it would be your duty to come up and use the means necessary to stop him. And that's similar to what I did. I used the means necessary to restrain this abortionist.
Paul Hill's final statement on the execution gurney remained defiant and advocated violence against abortion providers. His last meal included steak, a baked potato, broccoli, salad, orange sherbet, and sweetened iced tea. Johnny Leartis Robinson, February 4, 2004, lethal injection. Robinson was executed for the 1985 murder, essay, kidnapping, and armed robbery of Beverly St. George, a woman traveling from Florida to Virginia whose car had broken down on I-95. Robinson and an accomplice, Clinton Fields, found St. George with her disabled vehicle. They took her prisoner at gunpoint, handcuffed her, drove her to a secluded cemetery, and essayed her. Robinson then shot her twice in the head, killing her, to prevent her from identifying them. He was a repeated sex offender and was on parole for a Maryland essay conviction at the time of the murder. When asked if he had any final words before being executed by lethal injection, he said, "Yup, later." Robinson's final meal consisted of fried chicken gizzards, French fries, smoked sausage, butter pecan ice cream. John Richard Blackwelder, May 26, 2004, lethal injection. He was executed for the 2000 murder of a fellow inmate, Raymond Wigley, at the Columbia Correctional Institution. At the time of the murder, Blackwelder was already serving a life sentence without parole for a series of sex convictions, including the essay of a 10-year-old boy. Unable to commit suicide due to his religious beliefs, he killed Wigley specifically so the state of Florida would sentence him to death and carry out his execution, a phenomenon sometimes referred to as suicide by governor. He lured Wigley into his cell, tied him up, and strangled him with a sheet. He then pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and waived his appeals to speed up the process. As he lay strapped to the gurney, Blackwelder's last words focused on his religious faith. "I'm glad I get to go home. I'm proud to be a Christian, and I thank you, Jesus, for saving me and allowing me to come home. Amen." Blackwelder had a final special meal the day before his execution, which included pizza with cheese, onions, green peppers, ground beef and mushrooms, salad with lettuce, tomatoes, green peppers, cheese, and ranch dressing. He also had a Coke. On the actual day of his execution, he ate a lunch of sloppy joes, French fries, corn, but he refused to eat the scheduled dinner meal. Glenn James Ocha, April 5, 2005, lethal injection. Ocha was executed for the murder of 28-year-old Carol Skierva, whom he killed after she gave him a ride home from a bar in 1999. Ocha met Skierva at a bar where he worked. After having relations at his home, Ocha became enraged and killed her by hanging her. He hid her body in his garage, where it was later discovered. Ocha confessed to the murder the following day. He subsequently waived his appeals and volunteered for execution. Ocha apologized to Carol Skierva, her family and friends in his final statement, taking responsibility for his actions. His last meal included a chicken breast, potato salad, corn, and 2 biscuits, along with a large Pepsi. Clarence Edward Hill, September 20, 2006, lethal injection. Hill was executed for the murder of police officer Stephen Taylor and the wounding of Taylor's partner, Larry Bailey, during an armed robbery in 1982. On October 19, 1982, Hill and an accomplice, Cliff Jackson, drove a stolen car from Alabama to Pensacola to rob a Freedom Federal Savings and Loan Bank. When an alarm was triggered, police officers Stephen Taylor and Larry Bailey arrived at the scene. They arrested Jackson as he fled the front door. As the officers were attempting to handcuff Jackson, Hill approached from behind and opened fire, killing Officer Taylor and severely wounding Officer Bailey. Hill was shot 5 times in the ensuing gun battle, but he was captured shortly after. Hill's execution was notable for the legal battle that reached the U.S. Supreme Court over the constitutionality of Florida's lethal injection procedure, arguing it could be unnecessarily painful. Clarence Hill did not make a formal final statement. When asked if he had any last words while on the gurney in the death chamber, he stared at the ceiling and did not reply or speak. He also refused the special last meal request. Arthur Dennis Rutherford, October 18, 2006, lethal injection. Rutherford was executed for the 1985 murder, beating, and drowning of 63-year-old Stella Salomon, a widow who had hired him to perform odd jobs at her home. He planned to rob Salomon and make her death look like an accident. He was working at her home when the crime occurred. Evidence at his trial showed he had told others about his intentions beforehand and bragged about the murder afterward. He beat Salomon, breaking her arm and inflicting severe head wounds. He strangled her and left her naked body in her bathtub to drown. He then forged a $2,000 check from her account and had an acquaintance cash it. Police found his fingerprints and palm prints in the bathroom where the body was discovered. Rutherford did not make a formal final statement before his execution. He did, however, nod to his spiritual advisor among the witnesses. His last meal consisted of fried freshwater catfish, fried green tomatoes, fried eggplant, hush puppies, and sweet tea. Danny Harold Rowling, October 25, 2006, lethal injection. Rowling, known as the Gainesville Ripper, was executed for the murders of 5 college students over 4 days in August 1990. He also confessed to 3 additional murders in Louisiana. Rowling murdered 5 students, Sonia Larson, Christina Powell, Krista Hoyt, Tracy Pauls, and Manuel Taboada, during a burglary and robbery spree near the University of Florida campus in Gainesville. He targeted young women, mutilating and posing their bodies, and essaying the female victims and 1 female corpse. He committed these crimes to become a superstar and gain fame similar to Ted Bundy. He later pleaded guilty to all 5 murders. Rowling did not make a statement at the microphone just before his execution. Instead, he burst into singing a rambling gospel hymn with the refrain, "None greater than thee, O Lord, none greater than thee." He did this until the microphone was turned off and the lethal injection process began. He did, however, leave a handwritten note with his spiritual advisor shortly before his death, in which he confessed to the 1989 triple murders of the Grissom family in Shreveport, Louisiana, and expressed remorse for those specific killings, writing, "I and I alone am guilty." For his final meal, he requested and was served lobster tail, shrimp, baked potato, strawberry cheesecake, and sweet tea. He only ate the lobster tail. Angel Nieves Diaz, December 13, 2006, lethal injection. He was executed for the murder of Joseph Nagy, the manager of a strip club, during a 1979 armed robbery in Miami. On December 29, 1979, Diaz and 2 accomplices robbed the Velvet Swing Lounge. Most patrons and employees were locked in a restroom during the robbery, meaning there were no direct eyewitnesses to the shooting of the manager, Joseph Nagy. Diaz, who had escaped from a Puerto Rican prison where he was serving time for a previous murder, was later linked to the Florida crime by his fingerprint found on a matchbook at the scene. A fellow inmate also testified that Diaz had confessed to being the triggerman through hand signals, as they did not share a common language. Diaz maintained his innocence until his death. His execution on December 13, 2006 was botched. The needles were inserted incorrectly through his veins, causing the lethal drugs to seep into the soft tissue, leading to an unusually prolonged death taking 34 minutes and resulting in severe chemical burns on his arms. In his final statement, Diaz proclaimed his innocence and condemned the use of capital punishment. He stated, "The state of Florida is killing an innocent person. The state of Florida is committing a crime because I am innocent. The death penalty is not only a form of vengeance, but also a cowardly act by humans. I'm sorry for what is happening to me and my family who have been put through this." He declined to order a special last meal. He was offered the standard prison dinner, but he refused to eat it. Mark Dean Schwab, July 1, 2008, lethal injection. Schwab was executed for the 1991 kidnapping, essay, and murder of 11-year-old Junie Rios Martinez Jr. Schwab had been released early from prison just a month before the murder after serving time for a prior essay on a 13-year-old boy. He saw a picture of Junie in a local newspaper for winning a kite contest and used the guise of being a newspaper reporter to gain the family's trust. He then lured the boy away from a baseball field, took him to a motel room, bound him, beat him, and essayed him. To prevent the boy from informing authorities, Schwab then suffocated him to death and put his body in a footlocker in a secluded area of Brevard County. The brutality of the crime and the fact that Schwab was a repeat offender led to his death sentence. The case prompted the passage of the Junie Rios Martinez Jr. Act of 1992 in Florida, which ended early release or good behavior credits for sex offenders. Schwab did not make a formal final statement before his execution. For his final meal, served at 8 a.m. on the morning of his death, Schwab requested and ate 2 fried eggs, 4 strips of bacon, 2 sausage links, hash browns, buttered toast, and a quart of chocolate milk. Richard Henyard, September 23, 2008, lethal injection. Henyard was executed for the double murder of sisters Jamelia Lewis, 7, and Jasmine Lewis, 3, in January 1993, as well as the essay and attempted murder of their mother, Dorothy Lewis. Henyard and his 14-year-old accomplice, Alphonsa Smalls, carjacked the mother and her 2 young daughters in a Winn-Dixie parking lot in Eustis, Florida. They drove the family to a remote area where they took turns essaying Dorothy Lewis on the trunk of her car while her children were in the back seat. Henyard then shot Lewis multiple times at close range and left her for dead. Miraculously, she survived. Henyard and Smalls then drove off with the crying children, who were calling for their mother. Shortly after, they pulled over, took the girls out of the car, and Henyard shot each of them once in the head at close range before discarding their bodies in the bushes. During the abduction, when the mother was praying for help, Henyard reportedly told her, "This ain't Jesus, this is Satan." When asked if he had any last words before his execution, Richard Henyard replied, "No, sir." For his last meal, he requested and ate most of it: 2 fried chicken breasts, turkey sausage, fried rice, prison-made chocolate chip cookies, and Coca-Cola. Wayne Tompkins, February 11, 2009, lethal injection. Tompkins was executed for the murder of 15-year-old Lisa DeCarr, his girlfriend's daughter. In March 1983, Tompkins lived with the victim and her family. Prosecutors stated he tried to essay Lisa, and when she resisted by kicking him, he became enraged and strangled her with the belt of her pink bathrobe. He then buried her in a shallow grave under the house where they lived to make it appear she had run away. His cellmate later testified that Tompkins confessed to him the details of the murder and burial. His case was controversial at the time of his execution, with the Innocence Project of Florida raising doubts about the victim's identity and calling for further DNA testing. When asked if he had any last words while on the execution gurney, Tompkins said, "I'm good." For his final meal, he requested and ate fried chicken, banana split flavored ice cream, and a soda. John Richard Marek, August 19, 2009, lethal injection. Marek was executed for the 1983 kidnapping, essay, and strangulation of 45-year-old Adela Marie Simmons. In 1983, Simmons's car broke down and Marek and an accomplice offered her a ride, but instead they took her to a beach where she was essayed and killed. Both men were convicted of first-degree murder, with Marek receiving the death sentence and his accomplice a life sentence. Marek's last words expressed his Christian faith, stating, "Jesus, remember us sinners," and reciting the Lord's Prayer. His final meal included a bacon, lettuce and tomato sandwich, onion rings, French fries, blueberries and strawberries with whipped cream, and a Dr. Pepper. Martin Edward Grossman, February 16, 2010, lethal injection. Grossman was executed in Florida for the murder of 26-year-old Margaret Peggy Park, a state wildlife officer, on December 13, 1984. Grossman, then 19 years old, and the juvenile accomplice were found by Officer Park in a secluded, wooded area with a stolen handgun, a violation of Grossman's probation. When Park attempted to radio the sheriff's office, Grossman, who was a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than Park, beat her with her own flashlight. During the struggle, he wrestled her gun away from her and shot her once in the back of the head. The murder was committed to avoid arrest. In his final statement, Grossman expressed remorse for the events of that night and the impact on the victim's family. He also recited the Jewish Shema prayer. Grossman purchased items from the prison canteen earlier on the day of his execution rather than ordering a special last meal. He had a chicken sandwich, a can of fruit punch, a banana cream, and peanut butter cookies. Manuel Valle, September 28, 2011, lethal injection. Valle was executed for the 1978 murder of Coral Gables police officer Luis Pena and the wounding of Officer Gary Spell during a routine traffic stop. On April 2, 1978, Officer Pena was conducting a license plate check on a car driven by Valle. Valle got out of the police car and walked back to his own vehicle, retrieving a gun. He returned to the patrol car and shot Officer Pena in the neck, killing him. He then shot Officer Spell, but the bullets struck and were stopped by his bulletproof vest. Valle fled the scene but was captured 2 days later. He had prior convictions, and this murder resulted in a death sentence after 3 separate trials. When asked if he had any last words just before the lethal injection was administered, he said, "No, I don't." He did exchange some inaudible words with the warden once the drugs began, and the spokesperson later said Valle asked if he needed to start counting backward again, and the warden told him to shut his eyes. He also penned a final letter to the Miami Archbishop on the eve of his execution, expressing inner peace and thanking supporters, which was released later. For his final meal, he had fried chicken breast, white rice, garlic toast, peach cobbler, and a Coca-Cola. Oba Chandler, November 15, 2011, lethal injection. Chandler was executed for the 1989 murders of an Ohio woman, Joan Rogers, and her 2 teenage daughters, Michelle and Christy, whose bodies were found in Tampa Bay. He encountered the 3 women who were on vacation after they had pulled into a parking lot and asked for directions to their hotel. He noticed their Ohio license plates and used his Ohio background to build trust. He offered to take them on a sunset boat cruise in Tampa Bay. Once on the boat, he bound their hands and feet, attached concrete blocks to ropes around their necks, and threw them into the bay one by one while they were still alive. The bodies, which were naked from the waist down, later floated to the surface due to decomposition. Chandler was identified as the killer 3 years later when his distinctive handwriting, which he had used to write directions on a tourist brochure found in the victim's car, was recognized by a neighbor after police used billboards to publicize the handwriting sample. Oba Chandler had no final words in the death chamber. However, he did provide a final handwritten statement to prison officials, which was read at a post-execution news conference. The note read, "You are killing an innocent man today." He had previously stated in an interview that his last words would be, "Kiss my rosy red ass." For his final meal, he requested and ate 2 salami sandwiches on white bread with mustard, a peanut butter and grape jelly sandwich on white bread, iced tea, and coffee. Robert Bryan Waterhouse, February 15, 2012, lethal injection. Waterhouse was executed for the 1980 essay, beating, and drowning murder of 29-year-old Deborah Kammerer. On January 2, 1980, Waterhouse met the woman at a bar in St. Petersburg, Florida. They left together, and he drove her to a secluded area in Tampa Bay where he essayed her, beat her severely, mutilated her with a bottle, and dragged her into the water to drown. Her body was found the next morning. At the time of the murder, Waterhouse was on parole from New York, where he had served only 8 years of a life sentence for the 1966 murder of 77-year-old Ella Mae Carter during a burglary. Evidence linking him to Kammerer's murder included blood, hair, and fibers found in his car. Maintaining his innocence in the Florida case until the end, his final words were, "You are about to witness the execution of a wrongfully convicted, innocent man. To my wife and family, I want to say I love you all, and that's it." Waterhouse's final meal consisted of a large breakfast and dessert order, of which he ate most: 2 pork chop cutlets, 2 eggs sunny side up, 2 slices of toast, a slice of cherry pie, a pint of butter pecan ice cream, a pint of orange juice, and a pint of milk. David Allen Gore, April 12, 2012, lethal injection. Gore was executed for the murder of 17-year-old Lynn Elliott, one of 6 women and girls he admitted to killing. Gore and his cousin, Fred Waterfield, targeted young women and girls as part of a killing spree in and around Indian River County, Florida. The execution for Elliott's murder was due to these specific events in July 1983. Gore and Waterfield picked up hitchhiking teenagers, Lynn Elliott and a 14-year-old friend. They took the girls to Gore's parents' house, where they were tied up and repeatedly essayed in separate rooms. Elliott managed to escape the house, tied up and naked, and ran down the driveway. Gore chased her, caught her, and shot her twice in the head at point-blank range. A boy on a bicycle witnessed the murder and called the police, leading to Gore's immediate arrest and the rescue of the other girl. Gore confessed to 5 other murders, for which he received life sentences, but he was condemned to death for Elliott's murder. Before his execution, he apologized to the victims' parents and expressed remorse, religious belief, and a lack of fear of death. His last meal included fried chicken, French fries, pecan pie with ice cream, and a soda. Manuel Pardo Jr., December 11, 2012, lethal injection. Pardo Jr., a former Sweetwater police officer, was executed for the murders of 9 people over a 3-month period in 1986. He was convicted of a 92-day killing and robbery spree targeting individuals he believed were drug dealers, whom he referred to as parasites and leeches, who had no right to live. During his trial, he claimed he was a soldier on a mission to rid the community of drug dealers and asked the court to sentence him to death. Evidence against him included a diary in which he detailed the murders, a collection of Nazi memorabilia found in his apartment, and the use of credit cards stolen from victims. The final murder ended when he accidentally shot himself in the foot with one of the murder weapons, leading to his arrest in New York and the recovery of the bullet, which matched those from the crime scenes. In a handwritten statement, Pardo apologized to his own family for the pain and grief he caused them, but not to his victims' families. His statement also included, "Airborne forever. I love you, Mitchie baby," referring to his daughter. He also wrote he was now ready to ride the midnight train to Georgia. For his last meal, he had a traditional Cuban meal: roasted pork chunks, pork chops, white rice with pinto beans, red beans and rice in some reports, fried plantains, avocado, tomatoes with olive oil, pumpkin pie, eggnog, and Cuban coffee. Larry Eugene Mann, April 10, 2013, lethal injection. Mann was executed for the kidnapping and murder of 10-year-old Elisa Vera Nelson. On November 4, 1980, Mann abducted Elisa as she rode her bicycle to school in Palm Harbor, and she was carrying a note explaining she was late due to a dental appointment. Mann took her to a nearby orange grove where he beat her, slit her throat twice, and bludgeoned her head with a concrete-encased steel pipe. Evidence against him included the blood-stained excuse note found in his truck, which led to his arrest. He had a history of sexually motivated crimes against children, and although no evidence of molestation was found on Elisa's body, the crime was described as a brutal killing. When asked in the death chamber if he had any last words, Mann answered, "No, sir." However, he asked that a written statement be handed out after his execution, which was a Bible verse. "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord." For his final meal, served at 10 a.m. on the day of his execution, he had fried shrimp, fish and scallops, stuffed crabs, hot butter rolls, coleslaw, a pint of pistachio ice cream, and Pepsi. Elmer Leon Carroll, May 29, 2013, lethal injection. Carroll was executed for the 1990 essay and strangulation of 10-year-old Christine McGowan, who lived next door to a halfway house for homeless men where Carroll was staying. He was convicted of first-degree murder and essay. When the prison superintendent asked Elmer Leon Carroll if he wished to make a final statement, he declined, replying, "No, sir." For his last meal, he had sunny-side-up eggs, bacon, sliced tomatoes, a whole sliced tomato, biscuits, avocados, fruit salad, strawberries, papaya, peaches, and pineapple, canned milk to drink. William Edward Van Poyck, June 12, 2013, lethal injection. He was executed for the murder of correctional officer Fred Griffiths during a botched ambush and escape attempt in 1987. On June 24, 1987, Van Poyck and an accomplice, Frank Valdez, ambushed a prison transport van outside a doctor's office in West Palm Beach in an attempt to free their imprisoned friend James O'Brien. When the driver, Officer Fred Griffiths, resisted and threw the van keys into nearby bushes to foil the escape, he was fatally shot 3 times. Van Poyck was convicted of first-degree murder under the felony murder rule, meaning he was equally guilty whether he pulled the trigger or not, as he participated in the plan that led to the death. As he lay on the execution gurney, his final words were, "Set me free." He declined to order a special last meal. He was served an early morning breakfast of oatmeal and eggs, but did not request the traditional last meal, which Florida offered for up to $40. John Errol Ferguson, August 5, 2013, lethal injection. Ferguson was executed for the murders of 6 people during a drug-related home invasion in 1977 and the subsequent murders of 2 teenagers in 1978. In the 1977 Carroll City murders, Ferguson, along with accomplices Marvin Francois and Beaufort White, entered the house used by Mary Jane dealers, posing as a utility worker to gain access. They tied up 8 people who were at the house or arrived during the crime. When a mask from one of the accomplices fell off, they decided all witnesses must be killed. 6 victims were shot execution style in the back of the head, though 2 miraculously survived their injuries. In the 1978 Hialeah murders, 6 months later, Ferguson, dressed as a police officer, abducted and killed 17-year-olds Brian Glenfeld and Belinda Worley while they were parked at a lover's lane. He shot Glenfeld and then took Worley into nearby woods. He essayed her and then shot her in the back of the head. Ferguson had a long history of diagnosed paranoid schizophrenia and believed he was the Prince of God who would rise again after execution to save America from a communist plot. His execution was delayed for years due to legal battles over his mental competency, but courts ultimately determined he understood that he was being executed for the murders he committed. Ferguson's final statement in the death chamber was a proclamation related to his delusions. "I just want everyone to know that I am the Prince of God and I will rise again." He did not request a special last meal, and instead he ate the standard prison fare served to the other inmates. The meal consisted of a meat patty on white bread, potato salad, carrots, stewed tomatoes, and iced tea. Marshall Lee Gore, October 1, 2013, lethal injection. Gore was executed for the 1988 murders of 2 women, Susan Roque and Robin Novick, as well as the attempted murder and essay of a 3rd woman. Gore was convicted of a series of violent crimes targeting women in early 1988. He met his victims through an escort service he owned or in bars. Susan Rourke, January 1988. Gore met the 19-year-old college student in Tennessee and traveled with her to Florida, where he murdered her, inflicting trauma to her neck and chest, and then he dumped her body in a rural area of Columbia County. Robin Novick, March 1988. He abducted the 30-year-old exotic dancer from a bar parking lot. He stabbed her in the chest and strangled her with a belt before dumping her body in a trash heap in Miami-Dade County. He was executed for this specific murder. Tina Korolis, March 1988. He abducted and brutally attacked another exotic dancer, beating her with a rock, essaying, choking, stabbing, and slitting her throat, leaving her for dead. She survived and testified against him. He also kidnapped her 2-year-old son, whom he abandoned unharmed in an empty barn in Georgia before fleeing the state. Gore was known for his bizarre courtroom antics and claims of being targeted for organ harvesting, but a panel of mental health experts concluded he was faking insanity to avoid execution. He had no final words in the death chamber, refusing to speak when asked if he had a final statement. Gore initially requested a pepperoni and sausage pizza, but ultimately rejected the meal and did not eat any of it. For his final meal, he only had a can of Coca-Cola. William Frederick Happ, October 15, 2013, lethal injection. Happ was executed for the 1986 abduction, essay, and murder of 21-year-old Angela Angie Crowley. Hap encountered Crowley in a convenience store parking lot where she had stopped to use a payphone. He smashed her car window and kidnapped her, drove her to a secluded area near Crystal River where he essayed her, he strangled her to death with her own stretch pants, and then he left her body in a canal. Hap was identified by a shoe print found at the scene and was later arrested in California on unrelated charges. He ultimately confessed to the crime in his final statement before his execution. In a handwritten statement read aloud as he lay on the execution gurney, Hap confessed and apologized for the first time in 27 years. He wrote that for 27 years the murder had been clouded by circumstantial evidence and uncertainty, and that he must confess to the terrible crime for the sake of Crowley's family and loved ones. He offered sincere and heartfelt apologies to those concerned for Angela Crowley and those he had deceived into believing his innocence, concluding with Amen. For his last meal, he requested dessert items including a 12-ounce box of assorted chocolates and a quart and a half of German chocolate ice cream. Darius Mark Kimbrough, November 12, 2013, lethal injection. Kimbrough was executed for the 1991 essay and murder of 28-year-old Denise Collins, an aspiring artist who lived in the same Orlando apartment complex as Kimbrough and his mother. Kimbrough, then 18 years old, broke into Collins's second-floor apartment, likely using a ladder. He essayed her and beat her severely, breaking her jaw and fracturing her skull. Collins was found by paramedics barely alive on her bathroom floor, and she died in the hospital days later. DNA evidence, including blood and genetic material samples found at the scene, linked Kimbrough to the crime. An 11-to-1 jury vote recommended the death penalty, which the judge imposed. Darius Kimbrough had no final words when asked in the execution chamber. He remained silent. For his last meal, several hours before his execution, Kimbrough ate most of a meal consisting of 2 slices of pizza, fried green tomatoes, fried chicken, chicken gizzards, fruit punch, chocolate chip ice cream for dessert. Thomas Otis Knight, January 7, 2014, lethal injection. Knight, who changed his name in prison to Askari Abdullah Muhammad, was executed in Florida for the 1980 murder of corrections officer Richard Burke while in prison. He was originally condemned for the 1974 abduction and execution-style murders of his employer, Sidney Gans, and Gans's wife, Lillian, after forcing them to withdraw $50,000 from a bank. Knight declined to make a final statement. For his last meal, he ordered a large assortment of sweets: sweet potato pie, coconut cake, banana nut bread, a quarter bottle of Sprite, 2 tablespoons of strawberries, butter pecan ice cream, vanilla ice cream, and Fritos corn chips. Juan Carlos Chavez, February 12, 2014, lethal injection. Chavez was executed for the 1995 kidnapping, essay, and murder of 9-year-old Jimmy Rice. He abducted the boy at gunpoint from a school bus stop in a rural part of Miami-Dade County. He took the boy back to his trailer, where he essayed him. When Rice tried to escape, Chavez shot and killed him. He then dismembered the boy's body and hid the remains in concrete-filled plastic planters on a nearby ranch. The murder led to the passage of the Jimmy Rice Act in Florida, which strengthened laws related to sexual offenders. Juan Carlos Chavez made no final statement in the death chamber. He did, however, leave a handwritten message that was released by the state after his death. His letter, with religious themes, stated in part, "Today my Redeemer brings peace to my heart, so I cannot wish any less for everybody else. Therefore, I beg my Lord the Christ in these my last minutes on this world that his unfailing love be upon us, upon those who today take the life out of this body, as well as those who in their blindness or in their pain desire my death. God bless us all." For his last meal, he had ribeye steak, French fries, strawberry ice cream, Goya mango juice, hot sauce, a mix of bananas, mangoes, and papayas. Paul Augustus Howell, February 26, 2014, lethal injection. Howell was executed for the 1992 pipe bomb murder of Florida Highway Patrol trooper Jimmy Fulford. Howell, a member of a South Florida drug ring, placed a pipe bomb inside a gift-wrapped microwave. The bomb was intended for 2 women who had information that could implicate him and his brother in a drug-related murder. He paid another man to deliver the package across the state. Trooper Fulford pulled over the delivery man for speeding. After the driver was taken to jail, Fulford was left alone with the car's contents. He opened the gift-wrapped package containing the booby-trapped microwave, and the bomb exploded instantly, killing him and leaving a hole in the highway. During a phone call with a dispatcher after the traffic stop, Howell had the opportunity to warn authorities about the bomb but failed to do so. Paul Howell apologized to the victim's family in a more than 2-minute statement, then said prayers as the lethal injection drugs were administered. His statement included, "I would like to apologize to the Fulford family for what happened back in 1992. When the cops called, I thought Lester, the driver, wasn't going to let them go in there." For his final meal, he ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. He declined a drink. Robert Laverne Henry, March 20, 2014, lethal injection. Henry was executed for the 1987 murders of two female co-workers, Phyllis Harris and Janet Thermidor, at a fabric store where they worked in Deerfield Beach. On November 2, 1987, after the store closed, Henry, who worked there as a maintenance man, stole about $1,200 after tying up Phyllis Harris in a restroom. He then attacked Janet Thermidor with a hammer, doused her with a flammable liquid, and set her on fire. He returned to Harris, attacked her with the hammer, and set her on fire as well. Harris died at the scene, while Thermidor was found alive and identified Henry as her attacker before she died from her injuries. From the gurney, Henry read a 3-minute statement apologizing to the victims' families, as well as his own family and friends, expressing hope that his death would bring comfort. He also criticized the death penalty, asking, "Why would we continue to be murderers to those who have murdered?" During his statement, a victim's family member watching reportedly said, "Die." Henry requested and largely consumed the last meal consisting of red beans and rice, pecan pie, ice cream, and orange juice. Robert Eugene Hendricks, April 23, 2014, lethal injection. Hendricks was executed for the 1990 double murder of his cousin, Elmer Scott, and Scott's wife, Michelle Scott, in their mobile home in Sorrento, Florida. Prosecutors stated that Hendricks shot Elmer Scott in the head, hit him with the gun, and slashed his throat. He then shot Michelle Scott and stabbed her more than 30 times. The primary motive for the murders was witness elimination. Elmer Scott was scheduled to testify against Hendricks the next day in Hendricks's burglary trial. The man did not make a formal final statement in the death chamber, declining to offer any words when asked by the warden. For his last meal, Hendricks requested and ate pork chops, sausage gravy and biscuits, German chocolate cake, Mountain Dew soft drink. John Russell Henry, June 18, 2014, lethal injection. Henry was executed for the 1985 murders of his estranged wife, Suzanne Henry, and her 5-year-old son, Eugene Christian, just 2 years after he was paroled for the 1976 stabbing death of his previous common-law wife, Patricia Roddy. Henry's final statement was an expression of remorse and a request for forgiveness. "I can't undo what I've done. If I could, I would. I ask for your forgiveness if you can find it in your heart." Henry refused the final meal. Eddie Wayne Davis, July 10, 2014, lethal injection. Davis was executed for the 1994 kidnapping, essay, and murder of 11-year-old Kimberly Waters, the daughter of a woman he had briefly dated. In March 1994, Davis, in a drunken state, broke into his ex-girlfriend's Lakeland trailer looking for money. He found Kimberly Waters sleeping. He essayed her and then took her to a nearby location. There, he beat and suffocated her with a piece of plastic before dumping her body into a commercial trash bin. Davis, a repeat offender with a history of physical and sexual abuse in his own life, was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual battery, and received a unanimous death penalty recommendation from the jury. He had no formal last words when asked in the execution chamber. He spent his final moments murmuring prayers to himself. Davis ate a hearty last meal earlier in the day of his execution, which consisted of chopped steak with onion gravy, home fries, corn, Brussels sprouts, cherry ice cream for dessert, and a Dr. Pepper to drink. Chadwick Dulin Banks, November 13, 2014, lethal injection. Banks was executed for the 1992 murders of his wife, Cassandra Banks, and his 10-year-old stepdaughter, Melody Cooper, as well as the essay of the child. The murders occurred on September 24, 1992. Banks shot his wife in the head after an argument. He then essayed and murdered his stepdaughter. Evidence at the scene indicated a violent assault on the child. Banks was sentenced to death for his stepdaughter's murder. His last words, read in a statement during his execution, included an apology to the victims and his own family and an expression of remorse for his actions. Banks' last meal, served the morning of his execution, consisted of fried fish, homemade French fries, hush puppies, dinner rolls, banana pudding, red velvet cake, butter pecan ice cream, and ice water. Johnny Shea Cormondy, January 15, 2015, lethal injection. Cormondy was executed for the 1993 murder of Pensacola banker Gary McAdams and the repeated essay of McAdams's wife, Cecilia, during a home invasion robbery. He was identified as the ringleader of the crime, who recruited two accomplices, Curtis Bufkin and James Hazen, to break into the McAdams home after watching the house in preparation for a burglary. The couple was confronted as they returned home from a high school reunion. The intruders forced their way in, repeatedly essayed the wife, and Cormondy fatally shot Gary McAdams in the back of the head. The man also later threatened to kill witnesses who testified at his trial. His accomplices received life sentences because they assisted in the investigation. Cormondy's final words were a religious statement. "I pray to Jesus Christ, Son of God, I'm coming home." For his final meal, Cormondy requested and ate a large assortment of fried foods. Fried alligator tail, he ate all of this, fried okra, fried shrimp, fried eggs, hash browns, vanilla ice cream, and cream soda. Jerry William Corral, October 29, 2015, lethal injection. Corral was executed for the 1985 murders of his former wife, Susan Corral, who was 25 years old, his 5-year-old daughter, Tuesday Corral, his mother-in-law, Mary Lou Clark, who was 47, and his 2-year-old granddaughter, Tabitha Corral, in their Orlando home. The crimes were committed to eliminate witnesses to an earlier murder he had committed and to collect life insurance money. Evidence indicated a brutal, systematic killing spree. He fatally stabbed Susan and Tabitha. He stabbed and suffocated his daughter Tuesday. He fatally stabbed and bludgeoned Mary Lou Clark. He later set the house on fire to conceal the evidence. When asked if he had any last words, Corral, who was a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, rambled about being the victim of a government conspiracy and a massacre against him. For his last meal, he requested and ate a cheeseburger with ketchup, mustard, and mayo, French fries, a Coca-Cola. He ate the meal around 10 a.m. on the morning of his execution. Oscar Ray Bolin Jr., January 7, 2016, lethal injection. He was executed in Florida for the murder of 26-year-old Terry Lynn Matthews, one of 3 women he was convicted of killing in 1986. He was a serial killer who also murdered 25-year-old Natalie Blanche Hawley and 17-year-old Stephanie Collins in the Tampa Bay area that year. He was also linked to a 4th murder in Texas back in 1987. The cases went unsolved for nearly 4 years until a tip from the husband of his ex-wife led to his arrest in 1990. All 3 victims in Florida were found stabbed to death, with some also showing signs of bludgeoning. Natalie Blanche Hawley was murdered on January 25, 1986. Hawley was abducted from a restaurant parking lot and later found stabbed to death. Stephanie Collins was murdered on November 5, 1986. Collins disappeared after work and her body was found a month later, having been stabbed and bludgeoned. Terry Lynn Matthews was murdered in the same year on December 5th. Matthews went missing the same day Collins's body was found. Her body was later located with her throat cut and signs of bludgeoning. Important evidence in the convictions included the testimony of Bollins's ex-wife, who stated he confessed to her, and his half-brother, who testified to witnessing one of the attacks. Despite multiple overturned convictions due to legal errors, new juries found him guilty in retrials. When asked if he had a final statement before being executed by lethal injection, Oscar Ray Bolin replied, "No, sir." For his final meal, he ate ribeye steak, baked potato, salad, garlic bread, lemon meringue pie, and a bottle of Coca-Cola. Mark James Assay, August 24, 2017, lethal injection. Assay was executed for the racially motivated murders of two men, Robert Lee Booker and Robert McDowell, on the same night in 1987. Robert Lee Booker was 34 years old. After a night of drinking, Assay and an acquaintance encountered Booker on the street. After making racist comments, Assay shot Booker in the belly. Robert McDowell was 26. Later that evening, Assay picked up McDowell, a cross-dresser he mistakenly believed to be a light-skinned black woman. After a disagreement over money, Assay shot McDowell 4 times in the chest. Assay was the first white man in Florida history to be executed for killing a black victim since the state reinstated the death penalty in 1976. When asked whether he wanted to make a final statement, he said, "No, sir, I do not. Thank you." He remained silent during the execution procedure. His last meal consisted of fried pork chops, fried ham, French fries, vanilla swirl ice cream, and a can of Coke. Michael Ray Lambrix, October 5, 2017, lethal injection. Lambrix was executed for the 1983 murders of two people, Clarence Moore and Alicia Bryant, whom he killed after a night of drinking and having dinner at his mobile home near LaBelle, Florida. According to prosecutors, he lured Moore outside and killed him using a tire iron, repeatedly hitting him in the head and fracturing his skull. He then called Bryant outside and attacked her, choking her and kicking her in the head. A key witness, who was also present that night, testified against Lambrix, stating that he returned to the trailer alone, covered in blood, and finished eating spaghetti before washing up and burying the bodies. Lambrix consistently maintained his innocence, claiming he killed Moore in self-defense when he found Moore strangling Bryant. When asked for a final statement, he replied, "Yes, sir, I do. I wish to recite the Lord's Prayer." He then recited the prayer, ending with the words, "Deliver us from evil. Amen." For his last meal, Lambrix ordered a full traditional Thanksgiving dinner, a meal his mother had promised him if he were ever set free. He had been on a hunger strike for 12 days prior to this meal to protest his conviction. The meal also included caramel ice cream. Patrick Charles Hannon, November 8, 2017, lethal injection. Hannon was executed in Florida for the 1991 double murder of Brandon Snyder and Robert Carter in an apartment near the University of South Florida campus in Tampa. The murders were motivated by revenge. Snyder had reportedly threatened Hanson's accomplice's sister a few weeks earlier. Hannon and two accomplices went to Snyder's apartment. James Acker attacked Snyder with a knife, and Hannon then sliced Snyder's throat, nearly decapitating him. Robert Carter, Snyder's roommate, was in an upstairs bedroom hiding when Hannon found him and shot him 6 times in the chest. In his final statement before his execution, Hannon proclaimed his innocence in the murders and offered an apology to one of the victims' families. He stated that others were responsible for the killings. For his last meal, Hannon requested and consumed a variety of items, including beef short ribs, fried potatoes, bacon, a roll, peach cobbler, vanilla ice cream, and sweet tea. Eric Scott Branch, February 22, 2018, lethal injection. Branch was executed for the 1993 essay, fatal beating, strangulation, and assault of 21-year-old Susan Morris, a University of West Florida student. Branch attacked Morris in a university parking lot after one of her night classes, planning to steal her car to flee back to his home state of Indiana and avoid authorities there for a prior essay conviction. He dragged her to a secluded, wooded area where he brutally beat her, strangled her, and essayed her. Her body was found buried in a shallow grave with severe injuries, including a wooden stick broken off inside her private areas. Branch was also convicted of 2 other essays around the same time. As the execution drugs were being administered, Branch struggled and screamed, yelling, "Murderers! Murderers! Murderers!" Minutes earlier, he had addressed the corrections officer, saying it should be the governor and attorney general who carried out the sentence, not them. For his final meal, served around 9:30 to 10 a.m. on the day of his execution, he had a T-bone steak, a pork chop, French fries, 2 pints of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and a bottle of ginger ale. Jose Antonio Jimenez, December 13, 2018, lethal injection. Jimenez was executed for the 1992 fatal beating and stabbing murder of 63-year-old Phyllis Minas in her North Miami apartment. He was also convicted of a prior second-degree murder of another woman in Miami Beach in 1990. Jimenez, a cocaine addict, was burglarizing Minaz's second-floor apartment when she returned home and surprised him. Neighbors heard her screams and attempted to enter through the front door, but Jimenez blocked it from the inside and fled by jumping off a bedroom balcony. A fingerprint lifted from inside the front door matched his, leading to his arrest 3 days later. The victim was stabbed 8 times. Jimenez had no last words when given the opportunity to make a final statement in the death chamber. For his last meal, served at 9:30 a.m. on the day of his execution, he requested and was given a Cuban sandwich, bacon, 5 over easy eggs, French fries, vanilla chocolate ice cream with chocolate syrup, root beer, or a can of soda. Bobby Joe Long, May 23, 2019, lethal injection. Long was executed in Florida for the murder of 22-year-old Michelle Denise Sims, a former beauty pageant contestant whose nude body was discovered near an Interstate 4 overpass with her throat cut in May 1984. Long was actually a prolific serial killer and rapist known as the classified ad rapist because he often used classified ads to lure victims. During an 8-month period in 1984, he abducted, essayed, and murdered at least 10 women in the Tampa Bay area. Most of his victims were strangled, some had their throats slit, and others were bludgeoned. He was sentenced to death for the murder of Michelle Sims and received 28 life sentences for his other crimes. His capture was a result of a 17-year-old victim, Lisa Noland, who survived his attack, escaped, and provided police with detailed information that led to his arrest. Bobby Joe Long made no final statement in the death chamber. For his final meal, Long requested and ate roast beef sandwich, bacon, French fries, and a soda. Gary Ray Bowles, August 22, 2019, lethal injection. Bowles was executed for the 1994 murder of Walter Hinton in Jacksonville Beach. Bowles was also a serial killer, sometimes called the I-95 killer, who admitted to killing 6 men along the corridor between Florida and Maryland in 1994. Bowles targeted older gay men who paid for sex work. The execution for the murder of Walter Hinton occurred after Bowles lived in Hinton's home for a short time. As Hinton slept, Bowles dropped a 40-pound concrete stepping stone onto his head, then manually strangled him and stuffed toilet paper and a rag into his mouth. He was convicted of this murder, as well as 2 others, and received the death penalty for Hinton's killing after his appeals were exhausted. Bowles did not make a formal verbal statement in the death chamber. However, he provided a handwritten statement that was released after his execution. In the statement, he apologized for the pain and suffering he caused. "I'm sorry for all the pain and suffering I have caused. I hope my death eases your pain. I want to tell my mother that I am also sorry for my actions. Having to deal with your son being called a monster is terrible. I never wanted this to be my life. You don't wake up one day and decide to become a serial killer." For his final meal, Bowles requested and ate 3 cheeseburgers, French fries, and bacon. Donald David Dilbeck, February 23, 2023, lethal injection. Dilbeck was executed in Florida for the 1990 murder of 44-year-old Faye Lamb Van during an attempted carjacking. This crime was committed after he had escaped from prison while serving a life sentence for the 1979 murder of Lee County Deputy Dwight Lynn Hall when Dilbeck was just 15 years old. In his last words before the lethal injection, Dilbeck criticized Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in a lengthy statement which included, "I know I hurt people when I was young. I really messed up. But I know Ron DeSantis has done a lot worse. He's taken a lot from a lot of people. Ron DeSantis and other people like him can suck our dick." For his last meal, Dilbeck requested and ate fried shrimp, mushrooms, onion rings, butter pecan ice cream, pecan pie, and a chocolate bar. Louis Bernard Gaskin, April 12, 2023, lethal injection. Gaskin was executed for the 1989 double murder of Robert and Georgette Sturmfels in their Palm Coast winter home. He was dubbed the Ninja Killer because he wore all black ninja clothing during the crimes. On December 20, 1989, Gaskin, wearing his ninja outfit, shot the couple with a .22 caliber rifle through a window as they sat in their home. He then broke into the house, shot the wounded Georgette Sternfels again in the head, and stole items including a clock, 2 lamps, and a VCR, which he intended as Christmas gifts for his girlfriend. Later that same night, he attempted to murder another couple, Joseph and Mary Rector, at a nearby home by shooting at them, but they managed to escape. He also confessed to killing a third man back in 1986. Gaskin referenced his case in his last words, stating, "Justice is not about the crime, it's not about the criminal, it's about the law." Some parts of his statement were reportedly difficult to understand. For his final meal, he had a large order: barbecue pork ribs, buffalo wings, pork and turkey neck, shrimp fried rice, French fries with honey barbecue sauce, and water. Daryl Brian Barwick, May 3, 2023, lethal injection. Barwick was executed for the 1986 stabbing murder of 24-year-old Rebecca Wend in her Panama City apartment. Barwick, who was just 19 years old at the time, saw Wend sunbathing. He followed her and then returned to retrieve a knife and gloves before breaking into her apartment, intending to rob her. He stabbed her 37 times when she resisted. Barwick confessed, saying he killed her because he had seen him and he didn't want to return to prison for robbery, having been recently released for a separate crime. Evidence also linked him to an attempted essay at the scene. In his final statement, Barwick apologized to the victim's family and his own. He also commented on the justice system, expressing a desire for more compassion and kindness regarding young people serving life sentences. His last words included, "It's time to apologize to the victim's family, to my family. I can't explain why I did what I did." His last meal consisted of fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, black-eyed peas, rice, cornbread, cola, and strawberry ice cream. Dwayne Eugene Owen, June 15, 2023, lethal injection. He was executed for the 1984 murder of 14-year-old Karen Slattery and 38-year-old Georgiana Worden, both of whom were essayed and killed in their homes while children slept nearby. Owen was convicted of two separate attacks that occurred months apart in Palm Beach County in 1984. Karen Slattery was killed on March 24. Owen broke into a home in Delray Beach where the teenager was babysitting two young children. He repeatedly stabbed and then essayed her. The children were unharmed. Georgiana Worden was killed on May 29, 2 months later. Owen broke into a home in Boca Raton and bludgeoned the mother of two with a hammer, hitting her 5 times in the head and then essaying her. Her body was found the next morning by one of her children. He was sentenced to death in both cases and received multiple life sentences for other violent crimes and attacks on other women who survived. Claims of mental illness and insanity appeals were rejected by the courts, which found he was competent to be executed. When asked if he had any last words in the death chamber, Owen replied no. However, he provided a bizarre handwritten statement to prison officials earlier that morning at 7:45 a.m., which read, "I have transcended space and time. I have seen the visions of the crow. My energy and particles will transform ad infinitum. I will live on. I am Tula." 13. Owen ate his last meal early in the morning of the day of his execution. He had a bacon cheeseburger without a bun, onion rings, strawberries, a vanilla milkshake, cherry ice cream, and coffee. James Philip Barnes, August 3, 2023, lethal injection. Barnes was executed for the 1988 essay and hammer killing of Patricia Patsy Miller, a 41-year-old nurse. On April 20, 1988, Barnes broke into Miller's Melbourne, Florida condominium through a bedroom window. He confronted her at knife point, essayed her twice, beat her in the head with a hammer, and bound her with his shoelaces. He then set her bed on fire in an attempt to conceal the crime. At the time, the murder went unsolved. Barnes was later convicted of the 1997 strangulation murder of his estranged wife, Linda Barnes, and was serving a life sentence when he converted to Islam and decided to clear his conscience. In 2005, he sent a letter to a state prosecutor confessing to Miller's murder. He subsequently pleaded guilty to the murder, essay, burglary, and arson, and requested to be executed without further appeals. He also confessed to 2 other unsolved murders, Chester Westmore in 1986 and Brenda Fletcher in 1991, but he was never charged in those cases. Barnes did not make a formal final statement in the death chamber. He also declined to request a special last meal, and he did not have any visitors on the day of his execution. Michael Dwayne Zack III, October 3, 2023, lethal injection. He was executed for the 1996 murder of 31-year-old Ravone Smith, whom he met at a bar in Pensacola Beach during a multi-day crime spree where he also killed another woman. During a 9-day crime spree in June 1996, Zach murdered 2 women he met in bars. He was sentenced to death for the murder of Ravone Smith and received a life sentence for the earlier murder of 40-year-old Lori Barbara Rosillo. In the murder of Smith, Zach gained entry to her home where he hit her in the head with a beer bottle and essayed her. He then used an oyster knife from the kitchen to stab her 4 times in the chest, killing her. He stole a TV, a VCR, and purse and was arrested 2 days later after attempting to pawn the stolen items. When asked if he had any last words, Zach replied, "Yes, sir." He then looked at the witnesses and said, "I love you all." A more detailed written statement was released by his attorneys in which he expressed deep remorse. 27 years ago, I was an alcoholic and a drug addict. I did things that have hurt a lot of people. I have woken up every single day since then filled with remorse and the wish to make my time here on earth mean something more than the worst thing I ever did. Zach declined to request a last meal. He met with his wife and spiritual advisor in the hours before his execution. Lauren Kansley Cole, August 29, 2024, lethal injection. Cole was executed for the 1994 murder of 18-year-old college student John Edwards and the essay of his 21-year-old sister during a camping trip in the Ocala National Forest. Cole and an accomplice befriended the siblings at their campsite, then lured them away by offering to show them a nearby pond. While walking, Cole and his accomplice attacked the pair. John Edwards was beaten, had his throat slit, and was left for dead in the forest. Cole took the sister back to the campsite, tied her to a tree, essayed her, and left her there overnight before essaying her again the next day. The sister eventually escaped and flagged down a driver for help. Cole was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, robbery, and essay, and was sentenced to death, while his accomplice received a life sentence. When asked if he had any last words, Cole responded, "No, sir." He then remained silent. For his final meal, he requested and ate a meal with his son and a pen pal. He had pizza, M&Ms, ice cream, and soda. James Dennis Ford, February 13, 2025, lethal injection. Ford was executed for the 1997 double murder of a young couple, Gregory and Kimberly Malnery, in front of their toddler daughter. On April 6, 1997, Ford invited his co-worker, Gregory Malnery, and his wife Kimberly on a fishing trip to a remote sod farm in Charlotte County. Once there, Ford attacked the couple. He shot Gregory in the back of the head, bludgeoned him with an axe-like instrument, and slit his throat. Kimberly, who was injured in the initial attack, managed to strap their 23-month-old daughter Miranda into the back seat of their pickup truck. Ford returned, then beat, essayed, and shot Kimberly to death. The couple's daughter survived an 18-hour ordeal alone in the truck, covered in her mother's blood and suffering from insect bites, before being discovered by farm workers the next day. Ford was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, essay, and child abuse. He had no last words in the execution chamber. However, he provided a final written statement that was released by prison officials after his execution. It read, "Hugs, prayers, love. God bless everyone." For his final meal, he requested and ate steak, macaroni and cheese, fried okra, sweet potato, pumpkin pie, and sweet tea. Edward Thomas James, March 20, 2025, lethal injection. James was executed for the 1993 essay and murder of 8-year-old Toni Neuner and the murder of her grandmother, Betty Dick. He was renting a room in the grandmother's home at the time of the crimes. On September 20, 1993, a substance-abusing and intoxicated James attacked the victims in their home in Castleberry, Florida, while other young grandchildren were present. He strangled the 80-year-old Toni Neuner into unconsciousness, then essayed her, leaving her body behind his bed, where she later died from the injuries. He then proceeded to Betty Dick's bedroom, where he bludgeoned her with a candlestick and stabbed her repeatedly, at least 23 times, with a knife and a butcher knife. A 9-year-old sister of Toni witnessed part of the attack on the grandmother, but was tied up and placed in the bathroom by James. The man then stole the grandmother's car and jewelry and fled the state, leading to a nationwide manhunt that ended in California after the case was featured on America's Most Wanted. James did not make a final verbal statement in the death chamber. However, in a 2003 court appearance, he had stated his belief that the death penalty was the proper punishment for his crimes and that he sought to find peace with what he had done. For his last meal, he had fried pork chops, fried onions, potatoes, bacon, toast, root beer, ice cream, pie, and coffee. Michael Anthony Tanzi, April 8, 2025, lethal injection. Tanzi was executed for the 2000 kidnapping, essay, and murder of 49-year-old Janet Acosta, an employee of the Miami Herald. She was attacked while eating lunch in her van on Watson Island in Miami. Tanzi first asked her for a cigarette, then attacked her with a razor blade, punching her in the face. He bound and gagged her, forced her into the back of her own van, and drove her toward the Florida Keys. He essayed her, forced her to withdraw money from ATMs using her bank card, and stole cash. In a secluded area on Cadjo Key, he told Acosta he was going to kill her and began strangling her with a rope. He stopped to place duct tape over her mouth, nose, and eyes to silence her before continuing to strangle her until she died. When later asked by police why he couldn't let her go, he said, "If I let her go, I was going to get caught quicker. I didn't want to get caught. I was having too much fun." He left her body in a wooded area and spent the next 2 days shopping and buying Mary Jane using her ATM card before police arrested him. Tanzi confessed to another murder to police after his arrest in Florida, but he was never charged due to his pending death sentence. The victim was Carolyn Holder, a 37-year-old mother of two. She was found murdered while working alone at a laundromat in Brockton, Massachusetts. She had been stabbed to death and beaten. Tanzi had a history of substance abuse and a difficult childhood marked by abuse. His criminal behavior began in Massachusetts with property crimes, and he had served only 6 months of an 18-month sentence for theft and breaking and entering before committing his first known murder. Just before the execution, Tanzi offered an apology and recited a Bible verse. "I want to apologize to the family of Janet Acosta and Carolyn Holder for taking their lives. Heavenly Father, please do not blame those who do not know what they're doing." His last meal consisted of several items, of which he ate most earlier in the day. A fried pork chop, bacon, a baked potato, corn, vanilla ice cream, a candy bar, and soda. Jeffrey Glenn Hutchinson, May 1, 2025, lethal injection. Hutchinson was executed for the 1998 shotgun murders of his girlfriend, Renee Flaherty, and her 3 young children, Geoffrey, 9, Amanda, 7, and Logan, 4. On September 11, 1998, after an argument with Flaherty, Hutchinson went to a bar and drank before returning to their home in Crestview, Florida, with a 12-gauge shotgun. He busted down the front door and shot Flaherty and the 2 younger children in the head in the master bedroom. He then shot the oldest child, Geoffrey, first in the chest and then a second time in the head at point-blank range, a killing the judge described as especially heinous. After the killings, Hutchinson called the police himself and told the dispatcher, "I just shot my family." Hutchinson had no last words in the death chamber. His last meal consisted of salmon, mahi-mahi, asparagus, baked potato, and iced tea. Glenn Edward Rogers, May 15, 2025, lethal injection. Rogers, known as the Casanova Killer or Cross Country Killer, was executed in Florida for the 1995 murder of Tina Marie Cribbs, a 34-year-old mother of two. Rogers met Cribbs at a bar in Tampa, Florida, in November 1995. She was later seen leaving with him. Her body, which had been stabbed in the chest and buttocks, was found 2 days later in a hotel room bathtub. At the time, Rogers was on a multi-state killing spree and was a suspect in at least 4 other murders of women with similar characteristics, ages in their 30s, petite, and red hair across California, Mississippi, and Louisiana in 1994 and 1995. He was eventually arrested in Kentucky while driving Cribbs' stolen car. He was convicted in Florida for Cribbs' murder and received a separate death sentence in California for the murder of Sandra Gallagher. Glenn Rogers made a statement addressing the victims' families and the President Donald Trump. "I know there's a lot of questions that you need answers to. I promise you in the near future the questions will be answered and I hope in some way will bring you closure. President Trump, keep making America great. I'm ready to go." For his final meal, Rogers requested and was given pizza, chocolate cake, and soda. Anthony Floyd Wainwright, June 10, 2025, lethal injection. Wainwright was executed for the April 1994 kidnapping, essay, and murder of 23-year-old Carmen Gayhart, a nursing student and mother of 2 young children. Wainwright and his accomplice, Richard Hamilton, had recently escaped from a prison in North Carolina. They abducted Gayhart at gunpoint from a Winn-Dixie grocery store parking lot in Lake City, Florida, as she was loading groceries into her car. They drove her to a secluded wooded area where she was essayed, strangled, and shot twice in the back of the head. Her body was found 5 days later. DNA evidence was a crucial factor in linking Wainwright to the essay. Hamilton died in prison in 2023 of natural causes, but Wainwright was executed for his role in the brutal murder. The majority of Wainwright's last words were not clearly audible, but what could be understood was, "God, I give you my soul." He also sent a final private message to his wife Samantha, described as a romantic quote from The Princess Bride, telling her, "I love you." Wainwright declined to request a special last meal and did not eat the standard prison dinner. Thomas Lee Goodenas, June 24, 2025, lethal injection. Goodenas was executed for the 1994 essay and murder of 27-year-old Michelle McGrath, a former homecoming queen who was attacked while walking to her car after a night out at a bar. His last words in the execution chamber were inaudible to the media witnesses, reportedly due to the noise of an air conditioning unit. However, a spokesperson for the governor's office later reported that he repented and made a reference to Jesus in his final statement. For his last meal, he ate pepperoni pizza, fries, and a soda. Michael Bernard Bell, July 15, 2025, lethal injection. Bell was executed for the 1993 revenge murders of Jimmy West and Tamika Smith outside the Jacksonville bar. He also had prior convictions for 3 other murders. In December 1993, Bell armed himself with an AK-47 assault rifle and with accomplices waited outside a liquor lounge, intending to kill the man he believed was responsible for his brother's death earlier that year. The man had killed Bell's brother in self-defense. However, the intended target had sold his yellow car to his half-brother, Jimmy West. When West and his girlfriend, Tamika Smith, got into the car, Bell opened fire, killing both West and Smith and firing into a crowd of onlookers before fleeing. Bell was later linked to 3 earlier unrelated murders, a woman and her toddler son in 1989 and his mother's boyfriend 4 months before the bar shooting. He was sentenced to death for the 1993 double murder. Michael Bernard Bell used his last words to express gratitude for his execution, stating, "Thank you for not letting me spend the rest of my life in prison." Bell woke up early on the morning of his execution and ate a breakfast-style last meal consisting of an omelette, bacon, home fries, and orange juice. Edward Zakshevsky, July 31, 2025, lethal injection. Zakshevsky was executed in Florida for the 1994 murders of his 34-year-old wife Sylvia and their 2 young children, 7-year-old son Edward and 5-year-old daughter Anna. The motive for the killings was that his wife was seeking a divorce and he had told others he would kill his family rather than allow her to take the children to her native South Korea. Zakshevsky used his final moments to thank the state and quote poetry, proclaiming, "I want to thank the good people of the Sunshine State for killing me in the most cold, calculated, clean, humane, efficient way possible. I have no complaints whatsoever." He then began to quote Robert Frost's poem, "Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening," stopping partly through. For his last meal, he requested and ate fried pork chops, fried onions, potatoes, bacon, toast, root beer, ice cream, pie, and coffee. Kyle Barrington Bates, August 19, 2025, lethal injection. Bates was executed for the 1982 abduction, attempted essay, and murder of 21-year-old Janet Renee White in Bay County. He broke into her insurance office, brutally beat, strangled, and stabbed her when she resisted his attack. Bates declined to make a final statement when asked in the execution chamber. He also declined the last meal request and only had basic items from the prison canteen in the hours before his execution. Curtis Lee Wyndham, August 28, 2025, lethal injection. Wyndham was executed for the 1992 triple murder of his girlfriend, her mother, and another man in a shooting spree near Orlando that was motivated by a perceived debt and paranoia about police informants. On November 7, 1992, Wyndham, who was involved in drug dealing, became enraged when he learned that a man named Johnny Lee, whom he claimed owed him $2,000, had won money at a racetrack. Wyndham bought a .38 caliber revolver and ammunition from a Walmart and proceeded to kill his victims. He located Johnny Lee and shot him twice in the back from his car, then shot him 2 more times at close range as Lee lay on the ground. He then went to the apartment of his girlfriend and the mother of his daughter, Valerie Davis, and fatally shot her with no provocation in front of a witness. He randomly shot and wounded another man, Kenneth Williams, on the street, who survived. Finally, he spotted Davis's mother, Mary Lubin, driving to her daughter's apartment after hearing about the shooting. He approached her car as she stopped at a stop sign and shot her twice, killing her. He received 3 death sentences for the murders and a 22-year sentence for the attempted murder. His last words were unintelligible to the witnesses in the death chamber. For his last meal, he requested and ate a meal that included ribs, baked beans, collard greens, potato salad, pie, ice cream, and a soda. David Joseph Pittman, September 17, 2025, lethal injection. Pittman was executed for the 1990 triple murder of his estranged wife's parents, Clarence and Barbara Knowles, and her younger sister, Bonnie Knowles, after his wife filed for divorce. During contentious divorce proceedings, Pittman had threatened to harm his wife's family. On May 15, 1990, he went to their home in Mulberry, Florida. He cut the phone lines and fatally stabbed 60-year-old Clarence, 50-year-old Barbara, and 21-year-old Bonnie. He then set the house on fire and stole Bonnie's car, which he also later set on fire. A jailhouse informant and the witness to the burning car linked him to the crimes, leading to his conviction on 3 counts of first-degree murder, as well as arson and grand theft charges. Pittman's last words were a final proclamation of innocence. I know you all came to watch an innocent man be murdered by the state of Florida. I am innocent. I didn't kill anybody. That's it. For his last meal, he had steak, chicken, and biscuits. Victor Tony Jones, September 30, 2025, lethal injection. Jones was executed for the 1990 murders of his employers, a married couple named Jacob and Matilda Nestor, during an armed robbery at their business in Miami-Dade County. Jones, who was a new employee at the Nestor's engineering business, stabbed 66-year-old Matilda Nestor in the neck and 67-year-old Jacob Nestor in the chest during the robbery. Despite his fatal wound, Jacob Nestor managed to retrieve a pistol and shoot Jones once in the forehead before collapsing. Police found Jones wounded at the scene with the Nestors' money and personal property in his pockets. At the hospital, Jones admitted to a nurse that he killed the couple because they owed him money. He was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of armed robbery in 1993 and sentenced to death. When asked if he had any final statement, he replied, "No, sir." For his last meal, he had fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet tea. Samuel Lee Smithers, October 14, 2025, lethal injection. Smithers, known as the Deacon of Death, was executed for the 1996 murders of 2 women, Denise Roach and Christy Cohen, whom he met at a Tampa motel. Smithers, who worked as a Baptist deacon and a landscaper, met the 2 women, who were both sex workers, on separate occasions in May 1996. He paid them for relations, then drove them to a secluded 27-acre property he maintained that had 3 ponds in rural Plant City, Florida. He brutally murdered both women, reportedly using an axe in the attacks, and then he dumped their bodies in one of the ponds. Denise Roach was 24, and she was murdered around May 12, 1996. Autopsy showed she died from more than 10 stab wounds to her head, along with strangulation. Christy Cohen was 31, and she was murdered around May 28, 1996. She sustained multiple head wounds, skull fractures, and other injuries consistent with manual strangulation and drowning. The property owner discovered Smithers cleaning a bloody axe and saw drag marks leading to the pond, prompting a police report that led to the discovery of the bodies. Smithers was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder in 1999, with the judge citing the deaths as extremely torturous. When asked if he had a final statement, he declined, responding only with, "No, sir." Some sources state he ate a substantial meal of fried chicken, fried fish, a baked potato, apple pie with vanilla ice cream, and a sweet tea. He ate the meal in the morning hours before his execution. Norman Morrill Grimm Jr., October 28, 2025, lethal injection. He was executed for the 1998 essay and murder of his neighbor, Cynthia Campbell. On July 27, 1998, Grimm entered the home of his next-door neighbor, Cynthia Campbell, an attorney. He essayed and brutally murdered her. Campbell suffered multiple blunt force injuries to her face and head, consistent with a hammer, and 11 stab wounds to her chest, 7 of which penetrated her heart. He then wrapped her body in trash bags, bedding, and tape, and then dumped it into the waters near the Pensacola Bay Bridge, where it was later found by fishermen. DNA and physical evidence, including a bloody hammer and knife found hidden in a cooler at his home, tied Grimm to the killing. He had a history of violent crimes against women and was on parole from a Texas conviction when he murdered Campbell. He later waived his appeals and chose to proceed with his execution. When asked if he wished to make a final statement, he said, "No, sir." For his last meal, Grimm requested and ate fried pork chops, mashed potatoes with gravy, Brussels sprouts, banana cream pie, a chocolate milkshake, and a soda. Brian Jennings, November 13, 2025, lethal injection. Jennings was sentenced to death for the 1979 kidnapping, essay, and murder of 6-year-old Rebecca Becky Kunash. According to court records, the crime occurred on May 11, 1979, in Brevard County. Jennings, who was a U.S. Marine home on leave at the time, broke into the sleeping girl's bedroom by removing a screen and climbing through a window. He put his hand over her mouth, abducted her, and drove her to a secluded area near a canal on Merritt Island. There, he essayed the child. Following the assault, he smashed her head on the ground, causing a skull fracture, and then held her head underwater in the canal until she drowned. Jennings was arrested shortly after on an unrelated traffic warrant and eventually linked to the murder by fingerprints and a confession. He was convicted and sentenced to death after his third trial in 1986, as the 2 previous convictions were overturned on technicalities. His last meal was a cheeseburger, french fries, and a soda. He did not have any last words. Richard Berry Randolph, November 20, 2025, lethal injection. Randolph was sentenced to death for the 1988 essay and fatal beating of his former manager, Minnie Ruth McCollum, during an attempted robbery at a convenience store. The crime took place in August 1988 at a Handyway convenience store in Palatka, where Randolph had previously been employed. The man attempted to rob the store and was discovered by the manager, Minnie Ruth McCollum. A struggle ensued. During the attack, Randolph beat, strangled, stabbed, and essayed McCollum before stealing her car and escaping. Witnesses saw Randolph leaving the store and contacted authorities. McCollum was found with severe brain injuries and died in the hospital 6 days later. Randolph was apprehended in Jacksonville shortly after the crime while attempting to cash stolen lottery tickets. He confessed to the attack and led investigators to the discarded clothing. His last meal was a cheeseburger, french fries, eggs, a soda, and ice cream. When asked if he had any last words, he said, "No, I do not." Mark Gerolds, December 9, lethal injection. Gerolds was executed for the 1989 murder of Tressa Pettibone during a home invasion. Gerolds, who had previously worked as a carpenter on the Pettibone home, encountered Tressa and her children at a mall about a week before the murder. During the conversation, Tressa mentioned her husband was out of town on business. Gerolds later approached her 8-year-old son to ask about the children's school schedule and when their father would return. On February 1, 1989, Gerolds broke into the home, beat and fatally stabbed 33-year-old Tressa Pettibone, whose body was discovered by her son returning from school. Evidence linking Gerolds to the crime included pawned jewelry that had traces of the victim's blood on it and plastic ties found in his car that matched those used to bind her wrists. Gerolds was convicted of first-degree murder, armed robbery, burglary, and grand theft auto in 1990. He declined the last meal. When asked if he had any final words, Gerolds addressed someone whose name was inaudible to witnesses and said, "I'm sorry that I missed you. I loved you every day." Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.